My name is Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you about the night I died, or should have died, in a burning car on a deserted highway. The night something impossible pulled me out when no one else was there. The night everything I believed about God, reality, and the universe shattered in an instant. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, please subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who's skeptical about faith, and leave a comment about your own journey with doubt and belief. I was 32 years old, living in Denver, working as a software engineer at a tech startup. And I was an atheist, not a quiet, live and let live atheist. I was the kind who actively mocked religion, who laughed at Christians, who saw faith as nothing more than wishful thinking for people too weak to face reality. I'd grown up in a non-religious household. My parents were academics, my father a physics professor, my mother a biologist. They'd raised me on logic, evidence, and the scientific method. Religion, they taught me, was a relic of humanity's ignorant past, something we'd evolved beyond, and I'd taken that teaching and run with it. In college, I'd been president of the Atheist Student Union. I'd organized debates with Christian groups, relishing every opportunity to dismantle their arguments. I'd read Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, all the new atheist authors, and quoted them constantly. I wasn't just confident in my atheism, I was arrogant about it. I remember standing in front of a campus Christian fellowship, literally laughing as I explained why their beliefs were delusional. You really think an invisible man in the sky created everything, that a carpenter came back from the dead? That prayer does anything other than make you feel better about your own helplessness? The Christians had looked hurt. Some had tried to engage. Most had just quietly endured my mockery. I'd walked away feeling superior, enlightened, free from the superstition that enslaved so many others. That attitude had carried into my adult life. At work, I was known as the guy who'd argue about religion, who'd challenge anyone who mentioned God, or faith, or prayer. My co-workers learned to avoid the topic around me because I couldn't let it go without a lecture on why they were wasting their lives believing in fairy tales. My girlfriend Sarah was agnostic, not religious, but not actively hostile like me. She'd sometimes tell me I was too harsh. Nathan, people find comfort in their beliefs. Why do you care so much about tearing that down? Because truth matters, I'd say. Would you want to live in a comfortable lie? Or an uncomfortable truth? But what if you're wrong? What if there is something more than what we can see and measure? I'm not wrong. There's no evidence for God. None. And until there is, believing in Him is irrational. That conversation happened 2 weeks before the accident. 2 weeks before the night that would prove me wrong in the most undeniable way possible. It was a Friday in September. I'd been driving home from a work conference in Wyoming. The highway was empty, just me and the darkness and the occasional semi-truck passing in the opposite direction. I was listening to a podcast, some atheist intellectual discussing why religious belief was harmful to society, nodding along, agreeing with every point. I never saw what I hit, maybe debris in the road, maybe an animal, but suddenly my car was spinning. The steering wheel jerked out of my hands. I pumped the brakes, but nothing responded. Everything happened in slow motion and impossibly fast at the same time. The car hit something, a guardrail maybe, and flipped. I felt the sickening sensation of rolling, once, twice, glass shattering, metal crunching, my body slamming against the seatbelt. Then impact. The car came to rest on its roof, and I was hanging upside down, held by my seatbelt. For a moment, everything was quiet. Just the tick of cooling metal and my own ragged breathing. I tried to move. Pain shot through my left arm. Broken, definitely broken. My head throbbed. Something wet was running down my face. Blood, probably. Then I smelled it. Gasoline, strong and sharp and terrifying. And I saw the orange glow starting to flicker near the front of the car. Fire. Panic hit me like a physical force. I clawed at my seatbelt with my good hand, but the buckle wouldn't release. The impact had jammed it somehow. The flames were spreading. I could hear them now, a low crackling that was getting louder. I pulled harder on the seatbelt, twisted. yanked. Nothing. The heat was building. Smoke was starting to fill the car. That's when real terror set in. Not the quick fear of the crash, but the slow, creeping horror of knowing exactly what was about to happen. I was going to burn alive, trapped in an upside-down car on a deserted highway with no one around to help. I started screaming for help, for anyone, just screaming into the darkness, but there was no one. The highway was empty, no cars, no lights, just me and the fire that was going to kill me. I thought about Sarah, about my parents, about all the things I'd wanted to do and would never get to do now. And then, I don't know why, I thought about all the Christians I'd mocked, all the times I'd laughed at people for believing in God, for praying, for having faith. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, about to die, and all my atheism wasn't helping. My logic, my reason, my superior intellect, none of it could get me out of this car. The fire was closer now. I could feel the heat on my face. The smoke was choking me. I was going to die. And everything I'd believed about death, that it was just the end, just darkness, just ceasing to exist, was about to be tested. In that moment, hanging upside down in a burning car, I did something I'd never done in my entire life. I prayed. Not eloquently, not theologically, just desperately. God, if you're real, if you exist, please, help me. I don't want to die, please. The words felt foreign in my mouth, ridiculous. I was calling out to something I'd spent my entire adult life insisting didn't exist. But I was out of options, out of time, out of everything except desperation. Please, anyone, God, help me. The smoke was thick now, the heat unbearable. I could barely breathe. This was it. This was how I died. Alone in a burning car, my atheism offering no comfort, no hope, no help. I closed my eyes, waited for the end, and then I felt it. Hands, strong hands grabbing my shoulders. I opened my eyes, and through the smoke, I saw him. A man, dressed in white. Not regular clothes, something that seemed to glow even through the darkness and smoke. His face was calm, peaceful, like he wasn't standing next to a car that was about to explode. "Hold still," he said. His voice was clear, despite the roar of the flames. "I've got you." He reached across me and did something to the seatbelt. I heard it release with a click that shouldn't have been possible. Then he was pulling me out, through the shattered window, dragging me across broken glass and twisted metal. I felt my body scrape across the pavement, felt him lift me and carry me, actually carry me like I weighed nothing, away from the car. He set me down on the grass, maybe 50 feet from the wreck. "You're safe now," he said. I looked up at him, really looked, and that's when I noticed something impossible. There was light coming from him, not reflected light, not a flashlight, light that seemed to emanate from his very being. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. He smiled. It was the most peaceful smile I'd ever seen. "You called for help. I came." And then, before I could say anything else, before I could ask any of the 1,000 questions racing through my mind, there was an explosion. The car burst into flames, a massive fireball that lit up the highway. I turned to look at it, shielding my face from the heat, even from 50 feet away. When I turned back, the man was gone. Just gone. No footsteps walking away, no figure disappearing into the darkness, just empty highway in every direction. I lay there on the grass, my broken arm throbbing, blood on my face, staring at the spot where the man had been. "That's impossible," my brain insisted. He couldn't have just vanished. There's a rational explanation, but even as I thought it, I knew the truth. That wasn't a rational explanation. That was something else, something I'd spent my entire life denying. That was God, or an angel, or something beyond the natural world I'd been so sure was all that existed. And he'd saved me, after I'd mocked him, after I'd laughed at his followers, after I'd spent years insisting he didn't exist. He'd saved me anyway. I don't know how long I lay there. Time felt strange, distant. Eventually I heard sirens, saw lights. A trucker had seen the explosion and called 911. Paramedics rushed to me, started asking questions, checking my injuries. "How did you get out? one of them asked, looking at the burning wreck. That car is completely engulfed. You couldn't have gotten out on your own. Someone pulled me out, I said. Who? Where are they? I don't know. He was here, and then he was gone. The paramedic looked at his partner, then back at me. Sir, there's no one else here. You're alone. Are you sure you didn't get yourself out? I'm sure. My seatbelt was stuck. He released it. He pulled me out. They exchanged glances again, the kind that said they thought I had a head injury, that I was confused or hallucinating. But I wasn't. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I looked back at the burning car one more time. And I knew, with a certainty that defied everything I'd believed for 32 years, that I wasn't an atheist anymore, because I'd met God, or his messenger, or something that proved everything I'd believed was wrong, and my life would never be the same. I woke up in a hospital room, my left arm in a cast, bandages on my head, and an IV in my good arm. The late morning sun was streaming through the window, making me squint. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. The crash, the fire, the man who'd pulled me out and then vanished. But the cast on my arm and the pain in my ribs told me it was real. Sarah was sitting in a chair next to my bed, asleep. She must have driven straight here from Denver when they called her. As I shifted, trying to sit up, she woke with a start. Nathan! Oh my God, you're awake! She rushed to my side. How do you feel? Like I was in a car accident, I managed. My throat was raw, probably from the smoke. The doctor said you're incredibly lucky. Broken arms, some bruised ribs, minor burns, cuts from the glass. But Nathan, they said your car was completely destroyed. They can't believe you got out. I didn't get out. Someone pulled me out. Sarah's face changed, concern replacing relief. Nathan, the police said there was no one else at the scene. The trucker who called 911 didn't see anyone. You were alone when they found you. I wasn't alone. There was a man. He pulled me out of the car right before it exploded. The paramedics think you might have gotten yourself out and don't remember because of the head trauma. It happens sometimes with accidents. Sarah, my seatbelt was jammed. I couldn't release it. I tried. For what felt like forever, I tried, and then this man appeared, released it somehow, and pulled me out. Then he disappeared. She looked at me with that expression I recognized, the one that said she was trying to be supportive while also thinking I was confused or traumatized. Okay, we can talk about this later. Right now you need to rest. But I couldn't rest, because even lying in that hospital bed I could still see him, the man in white, the light that seemed to come from him, his calm face as he'd pulled me from a burning car. That wasn't trauma. That wasn't confusion. That was real. Over the next 2 days in the hospital, I had several visitors. My parents drove up from Boulder. My boss came by, a few co-workers, and everyone had the same reaction when I tried to tell them about the man who'd saved me. My father, the physics professor, was the most direct about it. Nathan, I understand you went through a traumatic experience. The mind does strange things under extreme stress, creates narratives to help us cope with near-death situations. What you're describing sounds like a classic stress-induced hallucination. Dad, I know what I saw. You think you know what you saw. But son, think about this logically. A man appears out of nowhere on an empty highway, pulls you from a burning car with superhuman strength, then vanishes without a trace. And you think this actually happened. I don't think it happened. I know it did. There's no evidence of anyone else being there. No footprints. No other vehicles. The police reviewed the scene. You were alone. Because he wasn't human. Dad, I think it was an angel, or God, or something beyond what we understand. My father's expression shifted from concern to something close to alarm. Nathan, listen to yourself. You sound like the religious people you've spent years debunking. One traumatic event, and you're ready to throw away everything you know about how the world actually works. What if everything I knew about how the world works was wrong? It's not. The world works according to natural laws, physics, biology, chemistry, not supernatural intervention. Then explain how I got out of that car. You got yourself out. In extreme situations, people do incredible things. The adrenaline, My seat belt was jammed. Then it wasn't as jammed as you thought. Nathan, there's always a natural explanation, always. You just have to be willing to accept it instead of jumping to supernatural conclusions. After he left, I lay in bed feeling more alone than I'd felt in the burning car, because I knew what had happened, and everyone was telling me I was wrong, that I was confused, that I was traumatized, but I wasn't. The doctor cleared me to go home on the third day. Sarah drove me back to Denver, and the whole way, I stared out the window thinking about what had happened. I'd spent my entire adult life being certain about reality, about what was possible and what wasn't, about the fact that the natural world was all that existed, and in one moment all of that certainty had been shattered. At home I couldn't settle, my arm was in a cast, so I couldn't work, I couldn't drive, I couldn't do much of anything except sit and think. Sarah tried to help, tried to distract me, but I could tell she was worried, not about my physical injuries, but about my mental state. On my fourth night home, she finally said what she'd been thinking. Nathan, I think you should talk to someone, a therapist, someone who specializes in trauma. I don't need a therapist. You went through something horrific, and now you're having these experiences, these beliefs that someone supernatural saved you. That's not like you. You're the most rational person I know. What if I'm being rational now? What if what I experienced actually happened? Then why can't anyone else verify it? Why is there no evidence? Because it was supernatural. By definition, it's beyond the natural evidence we'd normally look for. Do you hear yourself? You sound like the Christians you used to debate, the ones who'd say, you just have to have faith when they couldn't prove their claims. Her words hit me hard, because she was right. I did sound like them. But the difference was, I wasn't asking anyone to believe based on ancient texts or tradition or faith. I was telling them what I'd directly experienced. Sarah, I know this is hard to understand. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't deny what happened just because it doesn't fit the worldview I used to have. Used to have? Nathan, are you saying you believe in God now? I was quiet for a long moment, because that's exactly what I was saying, and it felt insane, impossible, like betraying everything I'd ever stood for. But I couldn't lie. I don't know what I believe, but I know something happened that can't be explained by natural causes, and I can't just ignore that. Sarah looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Concern mixed with something else. Distance, maybe. I need some time to think, she said quietly, and she went into the bedroom and closed the door. I sat alone in the living room, my broken arm throbbing, and I felt the weight of what was happening. My girlfriend thought I was having a breakdown. My father thought I was experiencing trauma-induced delusions. My co-workers would probably think I'd lost my mind when they heard about this. And maybe they were right. Maybe I had lost my mind. But I couldn't shake the memory, the man's hands on my shoulders, the light emanating from him, the peace in his face, the click of the seatbelt releasing when I'd tried for minutes and couldn't make it budge. That was real. I knew it was real. Later that night, unable to sleep, I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and started searching, not for evidence to debunk religion, but for evidence to understand it. I searched for angel encounters, near-death experiences, divine intervention, all the things I would have laughed at a week ago, and I found hundreds of stories, thousands maybe, people who claimed they'd experienced something supernatural, who'd been saved by forces they couldn't explain, who'd encountered beings that defied natural explanation. I'd dismissed all of these stories before, written them off as delusion or lies or wishful thinking, but now I was one of them. I found myself on a website for a church in Denver. They had a section about testimonies, people sharing their experiences with God. One caught my eye. A woman who'd been in a car accident and claimed an angel had protected her children in the back seat while the front of the car was crushed. I clicked on the video, watched her tell her story, saw the emotion in her face, the certainty. 6 days ago, I would have laughed at her, called her delusional, felt superior to her gullibility. Now I understood, because I'd experienced the same thing. At the bottom of the page was information about services. Sunday morning at 10 a.m. I stared at that information for a long time. I'd never been to a church service, not once in my 32 years. My parents had been adamantly opposed to religion, and I'd taken that stance even further. The idea of going to church felt absurd, foreign, like visiting a different planet. But I also knew I couldn't keep going like this, couldn't keep processing this alone, couldn't keep having everyone I loved look at me like I was losing my grip on reality. Maybe at a church, I'd find people who wouldn't think I was crazy, who'd understand what I'd experienced. Sunday morning came. Sarah had barely spoken to me in 2 days. She was still home, still caring for me, but there was a distance that hadn't been there before. "I'm going to go somewhere this morning," I told her. "Where?" "A church." She stared at me. "Are you serious?" "I need to talk to people who might understand what happened to me." "Nathan, this is getting out of hand. You hate church, you hate religion, and now you're going to voluntarily go to a service." "I don't know what else to do, Sarah. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Maybe at a church I'll find people who won't. Or maybe you'll find people who will reinforce a delusion you're having instead of helping you see reality. What if what I experienced is reality? What if everything we thought we knew is wrong?" "It's not wrong. You had a hallucination during a traumatic event. That's all. Nathan, please, don't do this. Don't throw away everything you believe because of one confused moment." But it wasn't one confused moment. It was the clearest moment of my life. "I have to go." I called an Uber, I still couldn't drive with my broken arm, and gave them the address of the church I'd found online. The whole ride there, I felt like I was doing something forbidden, like I was betraying myself, the rational, skeptical, atheist self I'd built over decades. But I also felt something else, something I couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or hope. The Uber dropped me off in front of a modern building. Not the traditional church I'd pictured, no steeple or stained glass, just a contemporary building with a sign, Crossroads Community Church. People were walking in, families, couples, singles, all dressed casually, all looking normal. I don't know what I'd expected. Maybe people in robes, maybe something obviously cultish or strange. But they just looked like regular people going into a building on a Sunday morning. I stood outside for several minutes, my heart pounding. Everything in me wanted to turn around, to get another Uber and go home, to forget this crazy idea. But I'd also spent 3 days being told I was wrong about what I'd experienced, being told I was confused or delusional or traumatized, and I needed to know if there were people who wouldn't tell me that. So I walked through those doors. The lobby was bright and welcoming. Music was playing, live music from somewhere deeper in the building. People were standing around talking, holding coffee, laughing. A woman approached me with a smile. "Hi, welcome to Crossroads. Is this your first time here?" "Yes," I managed. "Great, I'm Jennifer. Can I help you find anything?" I'm here for the service." "Perfect. It's just through those doors. Feel free to sit anywhere. Service starts in about 5 minutes." I walked through the doors into a large auditorium, rows of seats facing a stage. A band was setting up, giant screens on either side. I found a seat near the back, far from everyone else, where I could observe without being noticed. As the seats filled up, I looked around at all these people, these Christians I'd spent years mocking. And they just looked like people, happy people mostly, talking to each other, hugging, smiling. The service started. The band played. Everyone stood and sang. I didn't know the words, didn't know what to do, just stood there awkwardly while hundreds of people around me sang about God and Jesus and faith. It should have felt ridiculous, should have reinforced every negative belief I'd had about religion. But it didn't. It felt something. I couldn't quite identify what. Then the pastor came up, a man maybe in his 40s, dressed casually. He started talking, not with the fire and brimstone rhetoric I'd expected, but conversationally, about doubt, about struggling with faith, about encountering God in unexpected ways. And then he said something that made me sit up straight in my seat. Sometimes God shows up in our lives in ways that completely defy our expectations, ways that challenge everything we thought we knew. And when that happens, we have a choice. We can deny what we've experienced because it doesn't fit our worldview. Or we can have the courage to admit that maybe our worldview was incomplete. He was talking directly to me. Or at least, that's how it felt. Maybe you're here today because something happened that you can't explain. Maybe you've encountered something supernatural and now you don't know what to do with it. Maybe everyone's telling you it wasn't real, but you know it was. My heart was pounding. How could he possibly know? If that's you, I want to tell you something. You're not crazy. God does still move in supernatural ways. He does still intervene in our lives. He does still save us when we call out to him, even when we've spent years denying he exists. I felt tears starting to form. For the first time since the accident, someone was saying what I needed to hear. You're not alone, and you're not losing your mind. You encountered something real, and now you get to decide what you're going to do with that encounter. As the service continued, I sat there processing everything. For the first time since the accident, I didn't feel crazy. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd found people who would understand. And that changed everything. After the service ended, I sat in my seat while people filed out around me. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, to process what I'd just heard. But another part of me wanted to stay, to talk to someone who might actually understand. The pastor was standing near the front, talking with people. I watched him for several minutes, debating. Finally, I stood and walked toward him. My broken arm felt heavy in its cast. My heart was pounding. When there was a break in the crowd, I approached. "Excuse me," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. He turned and smiled. "Hi, I'm Pastor Mike. Welcome. I'm Nathan. I need to talk to someone about what you said, about encountering God in unexpected ways." His expression shifted to something more serious, more present. "Of course. Do you want to talk now, or would you prefer to schedule a time?" "Now, if that's possible. I don't know if I'll have the courage to come back." "Absolutely. Let's go to my office." He led me through a hallway to a simple office. Books lined the walls, a desk with a computer, 2 comfortable chairs facing each other. "Have a seat," he said, closing the door. "Can I get you water or coffee?" "I'm fine, thanks." He sat across from me. "So, Nathan, tell me what brought you here today." And I did. I told him everything. About being an atheist my whole life, about mocking Christians, about the accident, the fire, the man who pulled me out, the light, the disappearance, about everyone telling me it wasn't real. Pastor Mike listened without interrupting, without the skeptical expression I'd gotten used to seeing. Just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. That must have been terrifying. The accident, I mean, and also overwhelming, encountering something that challenged everything you believed. Everyone thinks I'm losing my mind, my girlfriend, my parents, everyone. What do you think? I think it was real. I know it sounds crazy. I know there's no physical evidence, but I was there. I felt his hands. I saw him. And then the car exploded right after he pulled me out. If I'd been in there even 5 seconds longer, do you think it was an angel? I don't know what it was. A week ago, I would have said angels don't exist. Now I don't know what to think. Pastor Mike leaned forward. "Nathan, can I tell you something? You're not the first person to sit in this office and tell me about a supernatural encounter. Over the years, I've heard dozens of similar stories, people who've experienced something that defied natural explanation. And you know what most of them have in common? What? They were at a desperate point, a moment where all their own strength, wisdom, and ability couldn't save them. And they cried out, sometimes to God, sometimes just into the void, and something answered. But I didn't believe. I'd spent years saying God didn't exist. Why would he save me? Why do you think? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Maybe that's the point. God's grace doesn't make sense. The fact that he loves us and saves us despite our rejection of him, that defies logic. But it's also the core of the Christian faith. I sat there processing. So you think it was God or an angel? I think you encountered something supernatural. Whether it was an angel or a direct intervention from God himself, I can't say for certain, but I believe your experience was real. The relief that washed over me at those words was overwhelming. Someone believed me, finally. What do I do now? I asked. That's up to you. But if God went to the trouble of saving your life in such a dramatic way, I'd say he has plans for you. The question is whether you're willing to explore what those might be. I don't know how. I don't know anything about God or faith or any of this. That's okay. No one starts as an expert, but if you're open to learning, I'd love to help you. We talked for another hour. Pastor Mike explained basics I'd never bothered to learn, despite years of arguing against Christianity. What Christians actually believed, why Jesus mattered, what salvation meant. And for the first time in my life, I was listening to Christian theology not to tear it apart, but to understand it. When I finally left the church, it was early afternoon. I called another Uber, and on the ride home I felt different, lighter somehow. Like a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying had lifted slightly. Sarah was on the couch when I walked in. She looked up, her expression guarded. "How was church?" The way she said it made it clear she thought the whole thing was ridiculous. It was good, actually. I talked to the pastor. He believed me about what happened. Of course he did. That's what pastors do. They reinforce religious experiences because it validates their worldview. Or maybe he believed me because it's true. Sarah stood up. "Nathan, I love you, but I'm watching you fall into something that I'm really worried about. You're letting one traumatic experience completely rewrite your entire understanding of reality. That's not healthy." What if my understanding of reality was wrong? It wasn't wrong. We've both spent our adult lives believing in evidence and reason. One unexplained event doesn't invalidate all of that. Sarah, I saw him. I felt him pull me out. How do you explain that? I don't know. Maybe there was someone there and they left before the trucker arrived. Maybe your memory is confused about the sequence of events. Maybe it was a hallucination. I don't know the explanation, but there has to be one that doesn't involve supernatural intervention. Why are you so sure about that? Because supernatural explanations are never the right answer. They're what people turn to when they can't handle the complexity of reality, when they need to believe there's meaning or purpose or someone watching over them. And what if there is someone watching over us? What if that's actually true? She looked at me with an expression of deep sadness. I don't know who you are right now. The Nathan I fell in love with wouldn't be saying these things. Maybe the Nathan you fell in love with was wrong about some important things. We stared at each other across the living room, and I could feel the distance growing between us, not just physically, but fundamentally. "I need some air," Sarah said. And she grabbed her keys and left. I sat alone in our apartment, my arm aching, and I realized something. My life was splitting into before and after. Before the accident, I'd been certain about everything, about reality, about God, about truth. And that certainty had defined my relationships, my work, my entire identity. Now, after the accident, all that certainty was gone. And the people in my life didn't know how to deal with the uncertain version of me. Over the next week, I threw myself into learning. I couldn't work yet because of my arm, so I had nothing but time. I read the Bible, started with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the actual words of Jesus that I'd dismissed without ever really reading, and I was shocked by what I found. Jesus wasn't the soft, passive figure I'd imagined. He was confrontational, radical, challenging. He claimed to be God, not a good teacher or a wise prophet, actually God in human form. I'd always dismissed that claim as obvious delusion, but reading his words now, after what I'd experienced, I saw it differently. What if he was telling the truth? I also started researching, not the atheist arguments I'd memorized, but the other side, the historical evidence for Jesus, the philosophical arguments for God's existence, the scientific limitations that might leave room for the supernatural. I read books by Christian apologists, watched debates where Christians held their own against atheist arguments I'd once found devastating, and slowly, reluctantly, I started to see that the case for God wasn't as laughable as I'd always believed. Pastor Mike had given me his cell number and told me to text any time I had questions, so I did, multiple times a day sometimes. If God is good, why is there suffering? How do we know the Bible is reliable? What about all the other religions? How do Christians know they're right? He answered every question patiently, thoroughly, never making me feel stupid for asking. And through those conversations, something was shifting in me. The defensive, mocking atheist I'd been was crumbling, and someone new, someone I didn't fully recognize yet, was emerging. 2 weeks after the accident, I met with Pastor Mike again at a coffee shop. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Confused, overwhelmed. Everything I thought I knew is being challenged." "That's normal. Your whole worldview is shifting. That's not a small thing. Sarah and I are barely talking. My parents think I've had a mental breakdown. My co-workers, I haven't even told them yet what I'm going through because I know how they'll react. It's hard when the people you love don't understand." "But Nathan, can I ask you something? Setting aside what everyone else thinks, what do you believe happened that night?" I was quiet for a long time, because this was the question I'd been avoiding. I believe God saved me, or sent someone to save me. I believe the supernatural is real, and I believe everything I spent 32 years denying is actually true. Saying it out loud felt both terrifying and liberating. "And what are you going to do with that belief?" "I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. That's okay. Faith is a journey, not a destination. But Nathan, if you truly believe God saved your life, at some point you're going to have to decide if you want a relationship with Him. What does that even mean?" "It means acknowledging that Jesus is who He claimed to be, that He died for your sins and rose from the dead, and choosing to follow Him." That sounds like a huge commitment. It is. It's the biggest commitment you'll ever make. But it's also the most important one. I sat there, coffee getting cold, processing what he'd said. A month ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting in a coffee shop seriously considering becoming a Christian, I would have laughed in their face. Now it was the most serious consideration of my life. "I need time to think about it," I said. "Take all the time you need. God's patient." That evening, I tried again to talk to Sarah about what I was going through. "I've been reading the Bible," I told her. She looked up from her laptop. "Nathan, this is getting out of hand." "I know it seems that way, but Sarah, what if I'm not crazy? What if everything we believed was incomplete?" "It's not incomplete. We have science, we have evidence, we have reason. That's enough. But it didn't save me from that car. I tried everything, my reason, my strength, my problem solving. None of it worked. And then I called out to God and immediately someone was there." That's coincidence, or timing, or any number of explanations that don't require supernatural intervention. Why are you so resistant to even considering the possibility? Because I've seen what religion does to people. It makes them stop thinking critically. It makes them accept claims without evidence. It turns them into people who believe things because they want them to be true, not because they are true. What if some things are true that we can't fully prove? What if experience is a valid form of evidence? Experience is the least reliable form of evidence. People experience things wrong all the time. Our brains trick us constantly. That's why we need objective, verifiable evidence. And what if some things can't be objectively verified, but are still real? She closed her laptop. "Nathan, I need to tell you something. If you keep going down this path, if you actually become religious, I don't know if I can stay in this relationship." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "What? We built our relationship on shared values, rationality, skepticism, atheism. If you abandon those, we don't have that foundation anymore. So you're saying if I believe in God, we're done?" I'm saying I don't know if I can be with someone whose entire worldview is based on faith instead of evidence. That's not who I fell in love with. We stared at each other, and I realized I was facing an impossible choice. On one side, Sarah, my parents, my friends, my entire social and professional world, all the people I loved who wanted me to go back to being the atheist I'd been. On the other side, a truth I couldn't deny, no matter how inconvenient, an experience that had shattered my certainty, and a growing sense that God was real and wanted a relationship with me. "I can't just ignore what happened," I said quietly. "I can't pretend it didn't occur just to make everyone comfortable. Then I guess we have a problem." That night, Sarah slept in the guest room, and I lay awake in our bed, my broken arm throbbing, thinking about everything I was about to lose. But I also thought about the man in the fire, about the hands that had pulled me to safety, about the impossible light, about the peace in his face. And I knew, no matter what it cost, I couldn't deny what I'd experienced. The truth had saved my life. Now I had to decide if I was willing to follow where that truth led, even if it meant losing everything else. 3 weeks after the accident, I made a decision that would change everything. I went back to work. My arm was still in a cast, and I couldn't type properly, but I could attend meetings and start easing back into my role. More importantly, I needed some sense of normalcy. My relationship with Sarah was hanging by a thread. My parents were concerned about my mental state, and I was spending most of my time reading the Bible and Christian apologetics books. Going back to work felt like stepping back into my old life, the life where I'd been certain about everything. My first day back, my co-workers welcomed me warmly, asked about the accident, expressed relief that I was okay. "Dude, we saw pictures of your car online," Jason, another engineer, said. "It was completely torched. How did you even get out?" This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment where I'd have to either lie or tell the truth and face their reactions. "Someone pulled me out," I said carefully. "Who? A trucker?" "I don't know exactly. A man. He got me out right before the car exploded." "That's incredible. Where did he go? Did you get his name?" "He left before the emergency responders arrived." "Man, you should try to find him. Thank him. That guy saved your life." I didn't tell them the rest. Didn't tell them about the light, about how he'd vanished, about how I believed he was an angel. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation, but it came anyway, in a way I didn't expect. Our team had a weekly meeting where we'd discuss projects and sometimes just chat. That Friday, the conversation turned to a news article about a church in Texas that was claiming miraculous healings. "Can you believe people still fall for this stuff?" Marcus, our team lead, said. "It's 2024, and we still have people claiming God heals through prayer." Several people laughed. I would have joined them 3 weeks ago. "It's psychological," another co-worker, Lisa, added. "Placebo effect. People feel better because they believe they will, not because anything supernatural happened." "Exactly," Jason chimed in. "It's the same reason prayer studies always fail. Because prayer doesn't actually do anything. It just makes people feel like they're doing something." I sat there, listening to them express the exact views I'd held for my entire adult life. Views I'd expressed just as confidently, just as mockingly. And I felt something I'd never felt before in these conversations. Discomfort. Because now I knew something they didn't. "What do you think, Nathan?" Marcus asked. "You've always got good takes on this religious nonsense." Everyone turned to look at me, waiting for me to join in the mockery, to provide the sharp, witty takedown of religious belief that they'd come to expect from me. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe there's more to it than we think." The room went quiet. Then Marcus laughed. "Come on, Nathan. You don't seriously think prayer works?" "I'm just saying maybe we're too quick to dismiss experiences we don't understand." "Experiences we don't understand?" Lisa said. "Nathan, these are people claiming supernatural intervention. That's not something we don't understand. It's something that doesn't happen." "How do you know it doesn't happen?" Now everyone was looking at me strangely. "Because there's no evidence for it," Jason said slowly, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. Because supernatural claims have never been verified under controlled conditions. Because every time someone investigates these miracles, they turn out to be fraud or misdiagnosis or coincidence. What if not every supernatural experience can be verified under controlled conditions? What if some things are real, even if we can't scientifically prove them? Marcus was staring at me. Nathan, are you feeling okay? You sound like a Sunday school teacher right now. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. I'm fine. I'm just suggesting maybe we shouldn't be so certain about things we haven't personally experienced. We don't need to personally experience something to know it's not real, Lisa said. That's the whole point of the scientific method. We test claims objectively, not through subjective experience. And what about experiences that can't be objectively tested? Then they're not valid forms of evidence, Marcus said firmly. Nathan, seriously, what's going on? This isn't like you. I realized I'd said too much, revealed too much, but I also couldn't sit there and listen to them dismiss the supernatural when I'd experienced it firsthand. Nothing's going on, just questioning some assumptions, that's all. The conversation moved on, but I could feel everyone glancing at me, wondering what had happened to the old Nathan, the one who would have been the loudest voice mocking religious belief. After the meeting, Jason pulled me aside. Hey man, are you okay? That was weird back there. I'm fine, because you're starting to sound like you're defending religion, which is not you. Maybe I'm just tired of being so certain about everything. Nathan, we're certain about things because evidence makes us certain. That's not arrogance, that's rationality. And what if something happened that challenged your certainty? What would you do? He looked at me carefully. Did something happen? With the accident? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, to share what I'd experienced and see if, maybe, just maybe, he'd believe me. But I saw the skepticism already forming in his expression. The same skepticism I would have had. No, just processing almost dying, I guess, makes you think about things differently. Sure, I get that. Just don't go getting religious on us, okay? He laughed like it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. That's exactly what was happening to me. That evening, I met with Pastor Mike again, this time at the church, in his office. How was your first week back at work? He asked. Complicated. There was a conversation about miracles and healing, and I couldn't just sit there and mock it like I would have before, but I also couldn't tell them why I've changed. Why not? Because they'd think I'd lost my mind. They're all atheists, rationalists. They dismiss what happened to me just like Sarah and my parents have. That's probably true, but Nathan, at some point, if you continue on this journey of faith, you're going to have to tell people. You can't keep it hidden forever. I know, but I'm not ready yet. I'm still figuring out what I believe. Are you? Because it seems like you've already figured it out. You just haven't fully accepted it yet. He was right. I knew he was right. I believed God was real. I believed the supernatural existed. I believed Jesus was who he claimed to be. I believed I'd been saved by divine intervention, but accepting those beliefs, really accepting them, meant changing my entire life, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. What does it actually mean to become a Christian? I asked. Like, practically. What changes? Pastor Mike leaned back in his chair. Everything and nothing. Let me explain. When you give your life to Christ, your identity changes. You go from being someone living for yourself to someone living for God. That's the everything that changes. But practically, you're still you. You still have the same personality, the same interests, the same career. Christianity isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. But things would have to change, right? I can't keep living exactly like I was. Some things would naturally change because your priorities shift. Things that used to matter might matter less. Things you ignored might become important. But Nathan, God doesn't ask you to become someone you're not. He asks you to become fully yourself, the self he created you to be. What about my relationships? Sarah basically said, if I become religious, we're done. My parents will think I've betrayed everything they taught me. My co-workers will think I've lost my credibility. That's the hardest part of conversion, when your faith costs you relationships. Jesus warned about that. He said following him might divide families, that you might lose friends. It doesn't make it easier, but he was honest about the cost. I don't want to lose them. I know, but you have to ask yourself, what's more important? The truth of what you've experienced and what you believe, or maintaining relationships based on who you used to be? I sat there in silence, because that was the question I'd been avoiding, the impossible choice I didn't want to make. "Can I ask you something?" Pastor Mike said. "Why are you fighting this so hard? What do you mean? You know God is real. You experienced him directly. You've been reading the Bible, learning about Jesus, coming to church, asking all the right questions. You're clearly moving toward faith. So why are you resisting taking that final step?" "Because I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of being wrong, of making the biggest mistake of my life, of throwing away everything I've built on what might be a delusion." "Do you really think it's a delusion?" "No, but everyone else does. And that matters to you." "Of course it matters. I'm a software engineer. My entire career is built on logic and evidence. If I become a Christian, I'll lose credibility. People will think I can't be trusted to think rationally. So you're willing to deny what you know to be true in order to maintain your professional reputation?" The way he said it made me realize how absurd it sounded, how cowardly. "I just wish there was a way to believe without it costing me everything." There isn't. Faith always costs something. The question is whether what you gain is worth what you lose. I left that meeting with more questions than answers, but one thing was becoming clear. I couldn't stay in this in-between place forever. Eventually, I'd have to choose. That weekend, my parents came to visit. They wanted to check on my recovery and, I suspected, assess my mental state. We had dinner at our apartment. Awkward, with Sarah barely speaking and my parents clearly worried. Finally, my father brought it up directly. "Nathan, your mother and I are concerned. Sarah says you've been going to church, reading the Bible, talking to a pastor. Is this true?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I'm trying to understand what happened to me." "You were in a traumatic accident. What you need is therapy, not religion." "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the hospital, about stress-induced hallucinations. And Dad, I've researched it. I know what those look like. What I experienced doesn't fit that pattern." "Nathan, you can't seriously be considering becoming religious." "Why not?" My father looked genuinely distressed. "Because we raised you better than that. We taught you to think critically, to demand evidence, to not accept claims just because you want them to be true. And I am thinking critically. I've examined my experience from every angle. I've looked for natural explanations. They don't fit." "Then you haven't looked hard enough," my mother said. "There's always a natural explanation. Always." "How do you know? Have you ever seriously considered the possibility that the supernatural might be real?" "Of course not, because there's no credible evidence for it." "What if my experience is evidence?" "Personal experience is not reliable evidence," my father said. "That's basic epistemology. You know this, Nathan." "Whoa, so you're saying that what I directly experienced, what I saw and felt and know to be true, doesn't count as evidence because it doesn't fit your materialist worldview? I'm saying your brain was under extreme stress and created an experience that felt real but wasn't. You weren't there. You didn't see what I saw. And that's exactly why we can't trust it. You're the only witness. There's no corroboration, no physical evidence, just your memory of a traumatic event." We argued in circles for an hour. My parents becoming more alarmed, me becoming more frustrated at their unwillingness to even consider my perspective. Finally, Sarah spoke up. "This is exactly what I've been dealing with. He won't listen to reason." "Because reason isn't the same as materialism," I said. "You're all acting like the only rational position is atheism. But that's not reason. That's dogma." "Atheism based on evidence is not dogma," my father said sharply. "It's the logical conclusion when there's no evidence for God." "What if you're wrong about that? What if you've been dismissing evidence because it doesn't fit your assumptions?" "Nathan, listen to yourself. You sound like every religious apologist who's ever tried to defend faith against rationality. Or maybe they have a point we've been too arrogant to see. The room went silent. My parents looked at me like I'd become a stranger. I think we should go, my mother said quietly. You clearly need time to work through whatever this is. After they left, Sarah turned to me. You just accused your parents, two accomplished academics, of being dogmatic and arrogant. Do you hear yourself? I'm not attacking them. I'm just saying maybe they're wrong. They're not wrong. You're going through something, grief or trauma, or I don't know what, and it's making you vulnerable to religious thinking. But that doesn't make religion true. It just means you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have. No, you're not. The Nathan I know wouldn't abandon reason for faith. He wouldn't choose belief over evidence. He wouldn't become the thing he spent years arguing against. Maybe the Nathan you knew was wrong about some fundamental things. She shook her head. I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you throw away everything you are for a delusion. It's not a delusion. Then prove it. Show me evidence that what you experienced was actually supernatural and not just your traumatized brain trying to cope. I can't prove it, not in the way you want, but that doesn't make it less real. If you can't prove it, then you shouldn't believe it. That's Rationality 101. Some things can't be proven but are still true. Name one. Love, consciousness, beauty, meaning. None of those can be objectively proven, but we all believe they're real. That's not the same thing, and you know it. We stared at each other, and I saw it in her eyes. She'd already decided. She was done. I need you to make a choice, she said. Me or this religious fantasy you're building. Because I can't be with someone who's abandoned rationality. That's not fair. I'm not abandoning rationality. I'm just expanding what I'm willing to consider. That's what every religious person says to justify believing things without evidence. Choose, Nathan, me or God. The ultimatum hung in the air between us, and I realized that I'd already made my choice. I'd made it the moment I stopped being able to deny what I'd experienced. I'd made it every time I read the Bible and felt something resonate. I'd made it every time I talked to Pastor Mike and felt understood instead of dismissed. I can't choose you over truth, I said quietly, even if that truth costs me everything. Tears filled her eyes. Then I guess we're done. She went to the bedroom, started packing a bag, and I sat in the living room, my broken arm throbbing, watching my relationship end. All because I couldn't deny what had happened in that burning car. All because I'd met God and discovered that once you've encountered truth, you can't go back to living a lie, no matter what it costs. Sarah moved out that weekend. She took her clothes, her books, half the furniture. Every item she removed felt like another piece of my old life disappearing. I hope you figure out what's happening to you, she said at the door, boxes stacked beside her. I really do, but I can't be part of it. Sarah, wait, can we just— No, we can't. You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine. And she was gone. I stood in the half-empty apartment, surrounded by the ghost of our relationship, and felt the full weight of what my faith was costing me. The woman I loved, my parents' respect, my co-workers' trust, my entire social world, all gone. All sacrificed for something I couldn't prove, but couldn't deny. For the first time since the accident, I broke down completely, sat on the floor and sobbed, not from pain or fear, but from loss. From the overwhelming sense that my life was falling apart. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I found myself praying, really praying, not just asking for help. God, I don't know what I'm doing. I believe you're real. I believe you saved me. But this is so hard. I've lost Sarah. My parents think I'm crazy. My friends don't understand, and I feel so alone. I need to know this is real, that I'm not making the biggest mistake of my life. Please. Give me something, some confirmation that I'm on the right path. I sat in the silence, waiting for an answer, a sign, something. Nothing came, just the quiet of an empty apartment and the ache of loss. But as I sat there, something Pastor Mike had said came back to me. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting God, even when you don't. Maybe that's what this was, The real test of faith, not the dramatic rescue from a burning car, but the daily choice to believe when everything in my life was telling me to go back to who I'd been. The next day was Sunday. I almost didn't go to church. What was the point? I'd lost everything already. Maybe I should just go back to my old life, pretend the accident had never happened, rebuild what I'd broken. But I couldn't, because I knew the truth. And knowing the truth meant I couldn't live a lie, even if the lie was more comfortable. So I went to church. This time, I didn't sit in the back. I sat in the middle, surrounded by people who seemed so certain about their faith, people who looked like they'd never struggled with doubt or loss, or the cost of belief. The worship music started. Everyone stood and sang. I didn't know the words still, didn't know what to do with my hands, felt awkward and out of place. But as the song continued, something shifted. The words were about God's faithfulness, about how He never leaves us, about how His love doesn't depend on our circumstances, and I felt something break open in my chest, felt tears streaming down my face, felt the weight of the past month, the accident, the doubt, the loss, the cost, all of it pouring out. A woman next to me gently touched my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I nodded, unable to speak. "First time here?" "Second. But first time really needing it." She smiled with understanding. "I've been there, it gets easier." After the service, I found Pastor Mike. "Nathan, good to see you. How are you doing?" Sarah left. "My parents think I've lost my mind. My co-workers are questioning my rationality. And I'm sitting in an empty apartment, wondering if I've destroyed my life for something that might not be real." He guided me to a quiet corner. "I'm sorry about Sarah. That must be incredibly painful." "It is. And the worst part, I can't even blame her. A month ago, I would have done the same thing if she'd suddenly become religious. I would have thought she'd lost her grip on reality." "But you don't think that about yourself?" "No, because I know what happened was real. But Pastor Mike, how do I keep believing when it's costing me everything?" "By remembering why you started believing in the first place. You didn't choose faith because it was easy or comfortable or socially acceptable. You chose it because you encountered truth. That truth doesn't change just because it's hard. But what if I'm wrong? What if everyone else is right and I'm delusional? Are you willing to bet your life that they're right?" "What do you mean?" "You've already experienced something that either was supernatural or wasn't. If it was supernatural, if God really did save you, then you've encountered the most important truth in the universe. And walking away from that to make other people comfortable would be the real delusion. But if it wasn't supernatural, if everyone's right and you're wrong, then you've made a mistake. But here's the question. Which mistake is worse? Believing in God when He doesn't exist, or denying God when He does? I'd never thought about it that way. Pascal's wager, but from personal experience instead of philosophical speculation. "I can't deny what I experienced," I said, "even if I wanted to." "Then you have your answer. Now you just have to learn to live with the cost." Over the next week, I threw myself into understanding what I'd gotten myself into. If I was going to lose everything for Christianity, I needed to know exactly what I was believing. I read voraciously, the Bible, yes, but also church history, theology, philosophy. I watched debates between Christians and atheists with new eyes, not looking for the atheist to win, but genuinely trying to understand both sides. And I started finding answers to questions I'd never bothered to ask when I was an atheist. Why did Jesus have to die? Because sin creates a barrier between humans and God, and that barrier required a perfect sacrifice. How do we know Christianity is true and not the other religions? Because Christianity is based on historical events that can be investigated, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, not just philosophical teachings or mystical experiences. What about all the suffering in the world? Christianity doesn't deny suffering. It says God entered into suffering with us through Jesus and promises to ultimately redeem all suffering. None of the answers were simple. None of them removed all doubt. But they were substantial enough that I couldn't dismiss Christianity as obviously false anymore. I also started attending a small group that met on Wednesday evenings. Pastor Mike had recommended it, a group of people in their 20s and 30s, many of whom were new to faith or exploring it. Walking into that first meeting, I was terrified. What would I say? How would I explain my journey from militant atheist to confused believer in the span of a month? But the group welcomed me warmly. We sat in someone's living room, about 10 people drinking coffee and talking about a Bible passage. When it came time to introduce myself, I decided to be honest. I'm Nathan. A month ago I was an atheist, a pretty aggressive one. I mocked Christians, thought religion was for weak-minded people. Then I had a car accident, and something happened that I can't explain naturalistically, and now I'm here trying to figure out what I believe. The room was quiet. Then a guy about my age spoke up. I'm Jason. I grew up atheist too. Came to faith 3 years ago. Welcome to the weird club of ex-atheist Christians. There aren't many of us, but we exist. Others shared their stories. A woman who'd been agnostic and encountered God through a near-death experience during childbirth. A man who'd been a Buddhist and had a dream about Jesus. A woman who'd been raised Christian but left the faith and recently returned. For the first time since the accident, I didn't feel alone. These people understood what it was like to have your worldview shattered, to lose relationships over belief, to face the cost of faith. After the group, Jason approached me. Hey, I know what you're going through, the isolation, the sense that you've lost your entire social world. It's rough, but it does get better. When, gradually, you build new relationships, find your footing. Learn that faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about trusting the one who does. Did you lose people when you converted? Everyone. My family stopped talking to me for 2 years. My girlfriend left. My friends thought I'd joined a cult. It was the loneliest period of my life. And you don't regret it? Not for a second, because I found truth. And Nathan, once you've found truth, everything else is just comfort. And comfort isn't worth living a lie. Over the next weeks, Jason became a friend. The first real friend I'd made since the accident. Someone who understood what I was going through because he'd been through it himself. He introduced me to other former atheists who'd converted. We'd meet for coffee, talk about theology and philosophy, debate and question and process together. And slowly, I started to rebuild. Not the life I'd had, but a new life. One built on different foundations. 6 weeks after the accident, I made another decision. I needed to tell my co-workers the full truth about what had happened. I couldn't keep hiding my faith, couldn't keep pretending to be the person I'd been. And if I was going to lose my job or my credibility, better to be honest about why. I asked Marcus if I could share something at the next team meeting. Sure, he said. What's up? I'd rather wait until everyone's there. Friday came. Our team gathered in the conference room for our weekly meeting. Marcus looked at me. Nathan wanted to share something. Floor's yours. Everyone turned to face me, and I felt my heart pounding. This was it. The moment where I'd either be accepted or dismissed as a religious fanatic. I wanted to tell you all something about my accident, something I haven't been fully honest about. I told them everything. The fire, the jammed seatbelt, the man who appeared from nowhere, the light, his disappearance, my journey from atheist to believer. I know how this sounds. I would have laughed at this story 6 weeks ago, but I can't deny what I experienced, and I've become a Christian because of it. I thought you all deserved to know. The silence was deafening. Finally, Marcus spoke. Nathan, are you serious right now? Completely. You're saying you believe in God and angels and supernatural intervention. Yes, even though there's no evidence for any of that. There's my experience, that's evidence. Personal experience is the least reliable form of evidence. You know that. I do. But I also know what I experienced was real. Jason, my co-worker, not my friend from church, shook his head. Nathan, this is really concerning. You're a software engineer. Your job requires logical thinking. If you're starting to believe in supernatural explanations for things, I'm not suddenly believing in supernatural explanations for everything. I'm just acknowledging that in this one case, the supernatural explanation fits better than the natural ones. There are always natural explanations, Lisa said, always. You just haven't found the right one yet. I've looked. Believe me, I've looked. I wanted there to be a natural explanation, but there isn't one that accounts for all the facts. So your solution is to believe in magic. My solution is to follow the evidence where it leads, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. The conversation continued. Some people were hostile, others just confused. No one was supportive. When the meeting ended, Marcus pulled me aside. Nathan, I need to be honest with you. This is going to affect your standing on the team. People are going to question your judgment, your ability to think rationally about technical problems. I understand. Do you? Because you just told a room full of engineers that you believe in supernatural intervention. That's not something people forget. I know, but I couldn't keep hiding it. If I'm going to believe this, I have to own it. Even if it costs you your career. Even then, he shook his head, I don't understand you anymore. I don't fully understand me anymore either, but I know I can't go back to who I was. That evening, emotionally exhausted, I called Pastor Mike. I told my co-workers. It went about as well as expected. How do you feel about it? Honestly? Relieved. I've been hiding for weeks, pretending. Now it's out there. For better or worse, people know what I believe. That took courage. Or stupidity. I'll probably lose my job eventually. Maybe. But Nathan, you're learning something crucial about faith. It's not just about what you believe privately. It's about how you live publicly, and you're choosing to live honestly, even when it's hard. That's integrity. It doesn't feel like integrity. It feels like throwing my life away. Sometimes those feel like the same thing, but they're not. You're not throwing your life away. You're trading a life built on comfort for a life built on truth. That's an upgrade, even when it hurts. I wanted to believe him, but sitting in my half-empty apartment, having lost my girlfriend, my parents' respect, and now probably my career, it was hard to see how this was an upgrade. That night, I opened my Bible to a passage Pastor Mike had mentioned. Jesus talking about the cost of discipleship. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. The words hit me hard, because that's exactly what was happening. I was losing family, had lost Sarah, was sacrificing my old life. But the passage continued. Whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. I'd always heard about Christians carrying their cross, but never understood what it meant. Now I did. It meant choosing faith even when it cost you everything. It meant following Jesus even when the path led to loss and suffering and rejection. I'd thought the miracle was being saved from the fire, but maybe the real miracle was what came after. The choice to keep believing despite the cost. The faith to follow truth, even when it meant losing everything comfortable and familiar. I prayed that night with a new understanding. God, I've lost so much, and I'm scared I'll lose even more. But I can't deny what you've shown me. I can't go back to living like you don't exist. So I'm choosing to follow you, even though I don't know where this leads, even though it's already cost me more than I wanted to pay. Help me trust that you're worth it, that what I'm gaining is more valuable than what I'm losing, because right now, that's really hard to believe. But I'm choosing to believe it anyway, not because I feel it, but because I've met you, and once you've met God, everything else becomes secondary, even the things I thought were everything. 3 months after the accident, I did something I never thought I'd do. I got baptized. Pastor Mike had been talking to me about it for weeks, explaining that baptism was a public declaration of faith, a way of telling the world that I was choosing to follow Jesus. I don't know if I'm ready, I told him. What would make you ready? More certainty, more understanding, more something. Nathan, you're never going to have complete certainty. Faith always involves trust. The question isn't whether you know everything. It's whether you believe enough to commit. But what if I'm still figuring things out? You'll always be figuring things out. That's what discipleship is. A lifelong journey of learning and growing. But baptism isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about publicly identifying with Christ. I'd thought about it for a week, prayed about it, and finally decided if I was going to believe this, I needed to commit fully. No more hiding, no more half measures. The baptism was scheduled for a Sunday morning during the service. Pastor Mike had asked if I wanted to share my testimony before going into the water. Tell people your story, he'd said. How you went from atheist to believer. They need to hear it. So I stood in front of the church, hundreds of people I barely knew, and told my story for the first time publicly. About being a militant atheist, about mocking Christians, about the accident, the fire, the man who pulled me out, the impossible light, the cost of belief. 3 months ago, I would have laughed at myself for standing here, I said. I would have called myself delusional, weak-minded, someone who couldn't handle reality without inventing a supernatural explanation. But I'm standing here because I met God, or his messenger, or something that proved to me beyond any doubt that the supernatural is real. And once you've encountered that truth, you can't go back to living like it isn't true. I've lost a lot because of this belief. My girlfriend, my parents' respect, friends, maybe eventually my career. But I've gained something worth more than all of that. I've found truth, and I've found a God who loved me enough to save me, even when I'd spent years denying he existed. So today I'm getting baptized, not because I have it all figured out, not because I'm certain about everything, but because I believe Jesus is who he said he is, and I want to follow him wherever that leads. The church was silent when I finished. Then someone started clapping. Then others joined. Then everyone was applauding. I stepped into the baptismal pool with Pastor Mike. The water was warm. He placed his hand on my back. Nathan, because of your profession of faith in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, I now baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. He lowered me backward into the water. For a moment I was completely submerged, and in that moment I felt something release. The weight of my old identity, the shame of my mockery, the fear of the cost. When I came up out of the water, I felt different, lighter, free. The congregation was cheering. Jason, my friend from the small group, was in the front row grinning. Several people I'd met over the past months were crying, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I'd lost my old community, but I'd found a new one. People who understood, who believed what I believed, who'd welcome me despite my past. After the service, dozens of people came up to congratulate me, to share their own stories of coming to faith, to welcome me into the family. An older man with tears in his eyes grabbed my hand. Thank you for sharing your testimony. My son is an atheist, has been for years. Hearing your story gives me hope that God can reach him too. A woman in her 30s. I've been a Christian my whole life, but I've never heard anyone explain their faith as honestly as you did. It reminded me why this matters. A teenager. I've been questioning everything lately, but hearing how you went from complete skepticism to belief that helped me see it's possible to believe and still ask hard questions. Standing in that church, surrounded by people celebrating my decision, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the absence of struggle or doubt, but a deep sense of being in the right place, of having made the right choice, despite the cost. That evening, I posted about my baptism on social media. It was the first time I'd publicly acknowledged my faith online. I wrote, 3 months ago I had an experience that challenged everything I believed about reality. Today, I got baptized as a Christian. I know some of you will think I've lost my mind. Maybe you're right. But I can't deny what I've experienced, and I can't live like it didn't happen. For those of you who are skeptics like I was, I get it. I would have dismissed this too. But sometimes life confronts you with evidence that doesn't fit your worldview. And when that happens, you have to choose between comfort and truth. I'm choosing truth. The responses came quickly, and they were exactly what I expected. Former classmates, Nathan, this is really concerning. Have you talked to a therapist? Colleagues, can't believe you've gone religious. What happened to the rational Nathan we knew? A few atheist friends from college. This is disappointing. You were one of the good ones. Now you've fallen for the same superstitious nonsense we spent years debunking. But there were also surprising responses. An old friend I hadn't talked to in years. Nathan, I've been a Christian for a while but never told you because I knew you'd mock me. Reading your story made me cry. Welcome to the family. A cousin I barely knew. I had no idea you were going through this. I've been a believer for 10 years. Would love to talk to you about your journey. And then, unexpectedly, a message from my father. Nathan, your mother and I saw your post. We need to talk. Can you call us? I stared at that message for a long time, debating whether to call, scared of what they'd say. Finally, I called. My father answered. Nathan, thank you for calling. Hi, Dad. We saw your social media post about getting baptized. I know you probably think, Nathan, let me finish. Your mother and I have been talking, and we need to apologize. I was silent, shocked. We've been treating you like you're having a mental breakdown, like you're not capable of thinking clearly. But son, you're an intelligent adult. You've always been rational. And if you're saying you experienced something that convinced you God is real, maybe we need to take that seriously instead of dismissing it. You're not going to try to convince me I'm wrong? I'm not saying we believe what you believe. Your mother and I are still atheists, but we've been watching you over these past 3 months. The way you've handled losing Sarah, the way you've been willing to sacrifice your reputation for what you believe is true, that takes courage. And it doesn't look like mental illness. It looks like conviction. I felt tears forming. Thank you for saying that. We don't understand your beliefs. And honestly, we probably never will. But Nathan, you're our son, and we love you regardless of what you believe about God. My mother got on the line. Nathan, I've been reading about religious conversion, about people who have profound experiences that change their worldview. And I'm willing to accept that you had a genuine experience, even if I can't explain it. You don't think I'm crazy? I think you experienced something that you interpret as supernatural. I still think there might be a natural explanation we haven't found. But I also acknowledge that you were there and I wasn't, so I'm not going to keep telling you that your own experience is invalid. It wasn't full acceptance. They still didn't believe, but it was something. An acknowledgement that my experience mattered, that my beliefs were legitimate even if they didn't share them. Can we see you? My father asked. Come to Boulder for dinner? We want to hear more about what you've been going through. I'd like that. We scheduled dinner for the following weekend, and when we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling something I hadn't felt in months, hope that maybe I hadn't lost my family completely. At work, things were more complicated. After I'd told my team about my conversion, the atmosphere had changed. People were polite but distant. I could feel them watching me, wondering if my newfound faith would affect my work. 2 weeks after my announcement, Marcus called me into his office. Nathan, we need to talk about your role on the team. My stomach dropped. This was it. I was being let go. The partners have been discussing your situation, and there's concern about whether your new religious beliefs will affect your objectivity and analytical thinking. My faith doesn't make me less capable of doing my job. Maybe not, but there's a perception issue. You're working on critical systems, making decisions that affect the company, and now people know you believe in supernatural intervention. That raises questions. So you're firing me? No, not exactly, but we're restructuring, moving you to a different team, one with less critical responsibilities. It was a demotion disguised as a reorganization, a way to sideline me without officially punishing me for my beliefs. I see. Nathan, this isn't personal. It's about maintaining team cohesion and client confidence. It feels pretty personal. I'm sorry you see it that way. The decision is final. I walked out of his office feeling numb. I'd known this was coming, had been preparing for it, but it still hurt. Still felt like being punished for being honest about what I believed. That evening I met with Jason from church at a coffee shop. They demoted me, I told him, moved me to a team with less responsibility because they don't trust my judgment anymore. I'm sorry, man. That's rough. I knew it would cost me, but knowing and experiencing it are different. Are you going to stay? I don't know. Part of me wants to quit on principle, but I also need the job. And maybe this is where God wants me, working with people who need to see that Christians can be rational and competent. Or maybe it's time to look for something new, somewhere that values you for who you are now, not who you used to be. I hadn't considered that. You think I should leave? I think you should pray about it. Ask God what He wants. Maybe He's opening a door for something different. Or maybe He wants you to stay and be a witness where you are. But don't stay just because you're afraid of change. That night I prayed about my job, about whether to stay or leave, about what God wanted from me, and I felt a strange sense of peace about the demotion. Not that I was happy about it, but that maybe it was part of the journey, part of learning to trust God with my career, not just my beliefs. A week later, I had dinner with my parents in Boulder. I was nervous, didn't know what to expect. But when I arrived, they greeted me with hugs. Real, warm hugs. Over dinner, they asked questions, real questions, not attacks. What convinced you that Christianity specifically is true, and not just that something supernatural exists? How do you reconcile your scientific training with religious belief? What does being a Christian actually mean for how you live your life? I answered honestly, shared what I'd learned, admitted what I still struggled with. My father listened carefully. I still don't believe what you believe, Nathan. But I can see that you've thought this through. You're not just accepting things blindly, you're engaging intellectually with your faith. That surprises you. Honestly, yes. I always thought religious people turned off their brains. But you're not doing that. You're applying the same analytical thinking to theology that you apply to engineering. Faith and reason aren't enemies. I'm learning that. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. I'm proud of you, Nathan, for following your convictions even when it's hard, even when it costs you. That's not delusion. That's integrity. Tears filled my eyes. Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. We're still worried about you, she added. About the relationship you lost, the career challenges, the social isolation. But we trust that you're capable of making your own decisions. It wasn't conversion. They still didn't believe. But it was acceptance. And that meant everything. Driving back to Denver that night, I reflected on how much had changed in 3 months. I'd lost Sarah, been demoted at work, faced skepticism and mockery, sacrificed my reputation as a rational atheist. But I'd also been baptized, found a community of believers, reconnected with my parents on new terms, and discovered a depth of faith I never knew existed. The cost had been high, but I was starting to see that what I was gaining was worth it. Not comfort, not ease, not acceptance from the people I used to care about impressing, but truth and a relationship with God, and the freedom of living honestly instead of hiding who I'd become. That Sunday at church, a visiting missionary spoke about persecution and sacrifice, about Christians around the world who lost everything for their faith. Some of you are facing smaller versions of that right now, he said. You've lost relationships, jobs, family acceptance, and you're wondering if it's worth it. If following Jesus is worth the cost. I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you what I've learned over 30 years of ministry. Nothing you sacrifice for Christ compares to what He sacrificed for you, and nothing you gain from the world compares to what you gain in Him. After the service, I stood outside the church, watching people talk and laugh and live their lives of faith, and I thought about the man in the fire, the one who'd pulled me out when I should have died. The one who'd started all of this. I'd spent weeks asking God for confirmation, for signs that I was on the right path, for reassurance that this was all real, but maybe the confirmation wasn't in dramatic miracles or clear voices from heaven. Maybe it was in this, the fact that I'd been willing to lose everything for truth, that I'd chosen faith over comfort, that I'd followed where the evidence led even when it cost me. That was its own kind of miracle. The transformation of a heart that had mocked God into a heart that worshipped him. And standing there in the sunshine, 3 months after my world had been turned upside down, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the accident. Gratitude. Not just for being saved from the fire, but for everything that had happened since. The loss, the struggle, the cost, because all of it had led me here, to faith, to truth, to God. And that was worth everything I'd paid. And everything I might still have to pay. 6 months after the accident, I received an unexpected phone call that would change the trajectory of my faith journey. Nathan, this is Dr. Rebecca Chen. I'm a researcher at the University of Colorado studying near-death experiences and supernatural encounters. I came across your story online and I'd like to talk to you about it. My story is online? Someone posted a recording of your baptism testimony on YouTube. It's been viewed over 100,000 times. People are sharing it everywhere. Atheist forums, Christian websites, debate groups. Your story is resonating with a lot of people. I'd had no idea. I knew the church recorded services, but I hadn't thought about them being posted publicly. What do you want to talk about? I'm documenting cases of supernatural experiences that lead to religious conversion, particularly among former skeptics and atheists. Your case is fascinating because of the specificity of details and the dramatic nature of the rescue. Would you be willing to be interviewed? Your participation could help others understand these kinds of experiences. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. I was nervous about it, being studied like a lab specimen, but also curious. Maybe there were answers to questions I'd been asking. Dr. Chen met me at a coffee shop near the university. She was in her 40s, professional with a recorder and a notebook. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said. "I want to be clear up front. I'm approaching this as a researcher, not an advocate. I'm not trying to prove or disprove your experience. I just want to understand it. Are you a believer?" She smiled. "I'm agnostic. I've studied hundreds of these cases over the years. Some I can explain naturally. Others, I can't. I try to keep an open mind." For the next 2 hours, she asked detailed questions about my background as an atheist, about the accident itself, every detail I could remember, about the man who rescued me, about my conversion process, about how my life had changed. "Let me ask you something," she said, looking up from her notes. "How do you respond to people who say you experienced a hallucination caused by trauma and oxygen deprivation?" I've researched that extensively. Hallucinations caused by trauma have specific characteristics. They're usually fragmented, dreamlike, inconsistent with reality. What I experienced was none of those things. It was concrete, detailed, consistent, and it had real, physical results. I was pulled from a burning car. "But you were the only witness. There's no corroboration." "That's true. But the trucker who called 911 arrived moments after the explosion. He said I was lying 50 feet from the wreckage. My seatbelt was still buckled. It was cut or broken somehow. I couldn't have gotten myself out in that condition, dragged myself that far, in the seconds between the fire starting and the explosion." "So you're saying the physical evidence supports a rescue by someone with unusual strength, or supernatural strength?" She wrote something down. "Have you had any other experiences since then? Additional encounters with the supernatural?" "Not dramatic ones, but I pray now, and sometimes I feel a presence, like I'm not alone, like God is actually there, listening." I know how that sounds to a skeptic. I used to be one. Actually, that's consistent with other cases I've studied. People who have these dramatic encounters often report a continued sense of supernatural presence in their daily lives afterward. Do you have an explanation for that? Several possible ones: heightened awareness after trauma, psychological need for comfort, actual supernatural presence. I try not to draw conclusions before I have enough data. What do you think about my case specifically? She was quiet for a moment. Honestly, it's compelling. The details are specific. Your background as a vocal atheist is well documented. The physical evidence of the rescue, being found far from the car, the condition of the seatbelt, is consistent with your account. If I were forced to categorize it, I'd say it's in the unexplained but intriguing category. Not obviously a hallucination. No. Whatever you experienced, it had real effects. Whether that was a supernatural rescue or something else, I can't say definitively, but I can say your experience deserves serious consideration. After our meeting, Dr. Chen stayed in touch. She sent me research papers about near-death experiences, articles about religious conversion, studies on the psychological and neurological aspects of supernatural encounters. And I realized something. My experience wasn't unique. Thousands of people had similar stories, different details, different circumstances, but the same basic pattern. A desperate moment, a cry for help, an impossible rescue, a life transformed. That discovery was both comforting and challenging. Comforting because I wasn't alone, challenging because it raised questions. If so many people had these experiences, why didn't everyone believe? Why was skepticism still the dominant position among educated people? I brought these questions to Pastor Mike. If God is actively intervening in people's lives in dramatic ways, why isn't it more obvious? Why do people still have to choose to believe? Because faith requires freedom, he said. God could make his existence undeniable. He could write his name in the stars, appear to everyone in dreams. Force belief through overwhelming evidence. But then it wouldn't be faith, it would be compulsion, and God wants relationship, not forced compliance. But people are dying without knowing him, going to hell according to Christian theology. Wouldn't a loving God make it more obvious? That's the hardest question in Christianity, and I don't have a complete answer. But I know this: God is just and loving. He knows every person's heart, every circumstance, every opportunity they had to know him, and his judgment is perfect, even when we don't understand it. So what's my responsibility, now that I know? To share what you've experienced, to be a witness, not to force belief on anyone, but to offer your testimony. Let people decide for themselves. That conversation planted a seed, an idea that would grow over the next weeks into a clear sense of calling. Around this time, I started a blog. Nothing fancy, just a simple website where I shared my story and my journey of faith. I wrote about the accident, about my atheism, about my struggles with doubt and cost, about what I was learning. I didn't expect anyone to read it. It was mainly for me, a way to process what I was going through, but people found it, and they started commenting. From an atheist, I've followed your story since the baptism video. I still don't believe, but I respect your honesty. You're not the stereotype of a Christian I was taught to dismiss, from a struggling believer. I've been a Christian for years, but lately I've been doubting everything. Reading about your journey from skepticism to faith has strengthened my own faith. Thank you. From a parent, my son is an atheist. Reading your story gives me hope that God can reach him. From a former atheist, I converted 5 years ago and lost most of my friends. Reading about your experience makes me feel less alone. The blog became a place where people, believers and skeptics alike, could discuss faith honestly, without the usual hostility or defensiveness that characterize most online religious debates. And I realized this was my calling, not to be a pastor or a theologian, but to be a bridge. Someone who understood both sides, who could speak to skeptics in their language because I'd been one, who could help believers understand the atheist perspective because I'd lived it. 7 months after the accident, Pastor Mike approached me with an opportunity. We're hosting a series of talks for seekers, people exploring Christianity, questioning, not sure what they believe. Would you be willing to share your story? Not just the accident, but your whole journey, the doubts, the costs, the process of coming to faith. You want me to speak? I'm not qualified. You're exactly qualified. You're 7 months into your faith journey. You remember what it was like to be a skeptic. You understand the questions because you've asked them all. That's what seekers need. Not someone who's had decades of faith and forgot what doubt feels like, but someone who's still in the thick of it. I agreed, terrified. The event was on a Wednesday evening. About 50 people came, a mix of believers who'd brought seeking friends and people who'd come on their own. I stood at the front and told my story, all of it. The mockery, the certainty, the accident, the rescue, the aftermath, the loss, the doubts, the slow, painful process of building faith. I'm not going to tell you that becoming a Christian solved all my problems, I said. It didn't. In some ways, it created new ones. I lost relationships, damaged my career, alienated people I cared about. But I also found something I didn't know I was missing. Truth, not comfortable truth. Not easy truth, but truth that makes sense of reality in a way my atheism never did. When I was an atheist, I could explain how the universe worked, but I couldn't explain why it mattered. I could describe consciousness as brain activity, but I couldn't explain why consciousness should value anything. I could account for the mechanics of existence, but I couldn't account for meaning. Christianity does. It says the universe matters because God created it with purpose. Consciousness matters because we're made in God's image. Our lives matter because we're loved by the Creator. That's not just comforting, it's explanatory. It actually makes sense of the human experience in a way pure materialism never could. After I spoke, the questions came. Hard questions, honest questions. How do you know your experience was actually supernatural and not just your brain under stress? What about all the suffering in the world? If God is loving and powerful, why does He allow it? Why Christianity specifically? What about all the other religions? How can you believe in miracles when they violate natural laws? I answered as honestly as I could, not with perfect responses, but with the answers I'd found, the arguments that had convinced me. The intellectual framework I'd built over 7 months of intense questioning. And something remarkable happened. People engaged, not defensively, not with mockery, but with genuine curiosity. At the end of the evening, a woman in her 30s approached me. "I'm an atheist. I came tonight because my Christian friend has been bugging me for months. I expected to hate this, but I didn't. You actually made me think. I'm not converted or anything. But you made Christianity seem less ridiculous than I thought it was. That's all I'm hoping for, not to force belief on anyone, just to show that faith isn't intellectual suicide. You did that. And Nathan, thank you for being honest about the cost. Most Christians I've met just talk about how great their life is. You talked about what you lost. That felt real. Others shared similar responses. Skeptics who'd expected to dismiss Christianity easily, but found themselves actually considering it. Believers who'd never thought about the intellectual foundations of their faith. Seekers who felt like someone finally understood their questions. After everyone left, Pastor Mike pulled me aside. "That was powerful. You have a gift for this." "I just told my story." "Exactly. And that's what people need. Not perfect theology, not all the answers. Just honest testimony from someone who's lived on both sides. Nathan, have you considered that this might be your calling? Not engineering, but this, helping people understand that faith is intellectually viable." "I don't know. I'm still working through my own doubts half the time." That's what makes you effective. You're not pretending to have it all figured out. You're journeying toward truth and inviting others to journey with you. Over the next months, I spoke at several more events. Church services, small groups, even a panel discussion at the university where I shared a stage with an atheist philosopher and a Christian theologian. My blog grew. People started emailing me with questions, sharing their own stories, asking for advice about their faith journeys, and slowly I began to see how God was using what had happened, not just the rescue itself, but everything that had come after, the loss, the struggle, the intellectual wrestling, the honesty about doubt. All of it was being redeemed, turned into something that could help others. One email particularly moved me. It was from a college student who'd been raised Christian but had become an atheist. "Nathan, I've been following your blog for months. I've watched your baptism testimony probably 10 times, and I have to tell you, your story has brought me back to faith. Not all the way. I'm still working through a lot of questions. But you showed me that it's possible to be intellectually honest and still believe in God. That faith doesn't require turning off your brain. Thank you for that. You probably saved my faith." I read that email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Because this is what the rescue had been for, not just to save my life, but to transform me into someone who could help save others' faith. God hadn't just pulled me out of a burning car. He'd pulled me out of intellectual and spiritual death. And now he was using me to help pull others out too. That night I prayed with overwhelming gratitude. "God, 7 months ago I was broken and confused, lost everyone I cared about, wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But you were building something, taking all the loss and pain and doubt and turning it into something that could help others. Thank you for that, for not wasting my suffering, for using even my mistakes and struggles to reach people who needed to hear from someone who'd been where they are. I don't know where this is going, if I'll keep doing engineering, if I'll do this faith thing full time, if I'll write books, or just blog posts, or just have conversations. But whatever you want, I'm available. Use me however you want, because you saved my life, and now my life is yours. All of it, forever." 7 months after the accident, I wasn't the same person who'd crashed on that dark highway, but I also wasn't lost. I was found, rescued, transformed, and just beginning to understand what God had saved me for. 1 year after the accident, I returned to the highway where it had all happened. I'd been avoiding that stretch of road, taking alternate routes, making excuses. But as the anniversary approached, I felt a pull to go back, to see the place where my life had been divided into before and after. It was a Friday evening in September, around the same time the accident had occurred. I drove slowly, watching for the mile marker I remembered from the police report. And then I saw it. The guardrail that had been replaced, the scorched earth where my car had burned. Even a year later, nothing grew there. I pulled over and got out. Standing there looking at the place where I should have died, I felt the full weight of the past year wash over me. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd gained, how far I'd come, how much further I had to go. I walked to the spot where the car had been, knelt down, touched the blackened ground, and I prayed. "God, 1 year ago, you saved my life, right here, in a way I still don't fully understand, and everything changed. Thank you for the rescue, for everything that came after. For the transformation you've worked in me, even when it was painful. Thank you for not giving up on me during all those years I mocked you, for loving me when I was your enemy, for reaching out to save me when I'd spent decades denying you existed. I'm not the same person who crashed here, and I never will be again. Thank you for that too." As I stood to leave, a car pulled up behind mine. An older man got out. "You okay?" he called. "Yeah, I'm fine. This is where I had an accident a year ago. Wanted to see it again." He walked closer. "That was you? The car that burned? You know about it? I'm a trucker. I drive this route regularly. I remember that night. The explosion lit up the sky. By the time I got here, you were already out of the car, lying on the grass." My heart started pounding. "You were the one who called 911? "Yeah. How are you doing? You looked pretty bad that night." I'm good. "Actually, can I ask you something? Did you see anyone else when you arrived?" "Anyone else? No, just you. Why?" "I've been trying to figure out who pulled me out of the car. Someone rescued me right before it exploded, but no one saw them. The police couldn't find any evidence of another person being there." The trucker looked at me carefully. "Son, I got here maybe 30 seconds after the explosion. If someone had been here, I would have seen them. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The highway was empty in both directions, But someone pulled me out. I was trapped. My seatbelt was jammed. I couldn't release it. And then someone was there and they got me out. The seatbelt was cut, he said. I saw it when the paramedics were checking you. Clean cut, like someone used a knife or shears. I don't have a knife in my car. I didn't cut it. The trucker was quiet for a long moment. Then, you know what I think? I think you had help that night. The kind of help that doesn't show up on police reports. You believe me? I've been driving trucks for 35 years. I've seen things I can't explain. Accidents where people should have died but walked away without a scratch. Times when something told me to take a different route, and I found out later there was a pileup on my usual road. I believe there's more to this world than what we can see and touch. Are you a Christian? He smiled. I am now. Wasn't always. But yeah, I believe God watches out for us, and sometimes he intervenes in ways that defy explanation. We talked for another 20 minutes. He told me about his own faith journey. I told him about mine. And when we parted, I felt like I'd been given a gift, confirmation from an unexpected source that what I'd experienced was real. Driving home, I thought about the past year, about how God had used the accident and everything after it to completely redirect my life. A year ago, I'd been a successful engineer, confident atheist, in a committed relationship, surrounded by friends who shared my worldview. Now I was a demoted engineer, committed Christian, single, and building a completely new social world. On paper, it looked like loss, but it didn't feel like loss. It felt like gain, like I'd traded fool's gold for the real thing. That weekend, I had dinner with my parents again. It had become a monthly tradition, a way of maintaining relationship despite our different beliefs. So it's been a year, my father said over dinner. How are you feeling about everything? Grateful. Overwhelmed sometimes, but grateful. Do you ever regret it? Losing Sarah, the career setback, all the costs? Sometimes I miss what I had. But no, I don't regret it, because I know the truth now, and I can't unknow it just because it's inconvenient. My mother reached across the table. Nathan, your father and I want you to know something. We've been watching you this year, the way you've handled everything with grace, the way you've built a new life. We're proud of you, even though you don't agree with my beliefs, even though you've shown integrity, courage, consistency between what you believe and how you live. That's rare and valuable regardless of the specific beliefs. Have either of you reconsidered your atheism after watching what I've gone through? My father was quiet for a moment. I won't say I believe what you believe, but I'm less certain than I used to be. You've made me question some assumptions I didn't know I was making. It wasn't conversion, but it was openness, and that felt like progress. At work, something unexpected happened. Marcus, my team lead who demoted me, asked to meet for coffee. Nathan, I owe you an apology. For what? For how I handled your conversion. I let my own biases affect a professional decision. That wasn't right. What changed? I've been watching you over the past year. Your work is still excellent. You're still the same analytical, rational person you were. Your faith hasn't made you less competent. If anything, you seem more focused, more purposeful. So you don't think I'm delusional anymore. I still don't understand your beliefs. And honestly, I still think there's probably a natural explanation for what you experienced. But Nathan, I've also realized something. You're allowed to be wrong about theology and still be brilliant at engineering. Those are different domains. I shouldn't have conflated them. Does this mean I'm getting my old position back? He smiled. Actually, something better. We're starting a new initiative, developing AI ethics frameworks, making sure our technology aligns with human values. You'd be perfect for it. It requires someone who can think deeply about meaning, purpose, morality, someone who doesn't just see code, but understands the philosophical implications. You want me to lead an ethics project? Your faith journey has given you a perspective most engineers don't have. You've thought deeply about what matters, about truth and meaning and purpose. That's exactly what this project needs. It was vindication I hadn't expected. Not a return to my old role, but something better, something that actually aligned with who I'd become. "I'll do it," I said. And for the first time in a year, I felt like my professional life and my faith life were integrating instead of conflicting. Around this time, I received a message that would lead to one of the most significant moments of my journey. It was from Sarah. "Nathan, I know we haven't talked in almost a year, but I've been following your blog, and I need to see you. Can we meet?" My hands were shaking as I read it. I'd grieved the loss of our relationship, had come to accept that she was gone. Now she wanted to meet. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop. When I walked in and saw her, my heart ached. She looked the same, beautiful, familiar, but also somehow different. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "Of course. How are you?" "I'm okay. Dating someone new. He's great. But Nathan, I didn't ask you here to talk about my relationship. I need to tell you something." "Okay. I've been reading your blog, every post, watching your videos, following your journey, and Nathan, I was wrong." "Wrong about what?" "About dismissing your experience, about telling you it wasn't real, about making you choose between me and your faith." "Sarah, let me finish. I've spent this year watching you lose everything. Me, your career trajectory, your reputation, and not waver, not go back, not pretend it didn't happen. And that consistency, it's made me question things. Are you saying you believe now? I'm saying I'm not sure anymore. I'm not ready to call myself a Christian. But I can't dismiss it as easily as I used to. You've made it impossible to write off faith as delusion or weakness. Because you're not delusional. You're not weak. You're one of the smartest, most rational people I know, and you believe. What are you asking me? I want to understand, really understand. Not to get back together, I know that ship has sailed, but to understand what you've found that's worth losing everything for." We talked for 3 hours. I shared everything I'd learned, the intellectual framework, the philosophical arguments, the personal transformation, and she listened. Really listened, not to debate, not to dismiss, but to understand. When we finally left, she hugged me. "Thank you for not being bitter, for being willing to share this with me even after how I treated you. Sarah, you were just protecting yourself, trying to hold on to what made sense. I get it. I would have done the same thing. Still, thank you." As I watched her walk away, I felt something unexpected. Peace about our ending. Not regret for what we'd lost, but gratitude for what we'd had, and hope that maybe, someday, she'd find what I'd found. A few weeks later, Dr. Chen, the researcher who'd interviewed me, called with unexpected news. "Nathan, I'm writing a book about supernatural experiences and religious conversion. Your case is going to be one of the featured stories, but I wanted to ask your permission first and tell you something I discovered." "What did you discover?" "I've been researching the accident extensively, talking to first responders, reviewing the evidence. And Nathan, the physical evidence supports your account. The distance you were from the car, the condition of the seatbelt, the timeline. If someone didn't pull you out, I can't explain how you got to where you were found. So you believe it was supernatural?" "I'm a scientist. I can't officially conclude that. But I can say that natural explanations are insufficient. Something extraordinary happened. Whether you call that an angel or divine intervention or something else, that's up to interpretation. But it wasn't ordinary. Will your book say that? My book will present the evidence and let readers decide. But yes, I'll make it clear that your case is one of the most compelling I've studied." After we hung up, I sat in silence, processing what she'd said. Independent verification from a skeptical researcher that what I'd experienced was real. It wasn't absolute proof, nothing ever would be, but it was confirmation that I wasn't delusional, that my experience had basis in reality. That evening at small group, I shared about Sarah's visit and Dr. Chen's research. Jason grinned. "God's been busy on your behalf." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Sarah reaching out, your boss giving you a better position, a researcher validating your experience. These aren't coincidences. God's showing you that following him wasn't a mistake, that he's honored your faithfulness. Another member of the group, Maria, spoke up. "Nathan, your story has impacted so many of us. I've been a Christian my whole life, but watching your journey has deepened my own faith. You've shown us what radical trust looks like. I don't feel radical. I just feel like I'm stumbling forward. That's what radical faith looks like from the inside," Pastor Mike said. He'd started attending our small group occasionally. "It doesn't feel brave or dramatic. It just feels like doing the next thing God asks over and over again." 1 year after the accident, I stood in front of the church again. Pastor Mike had asked me to share an update on my journey. A year ago, I was pulled from a burning car by someone I believe was an angel. That started a journey that cost me almost everything I valued: my relationship, my reputation, my certainty about reality. But I've gained something I didn't know I was missing: a relationship with God, a purpose beyond myself, a community of people who care about truth more than comfort. I don't have all the answers. I still struggle with doubt. I still ask hard questions. But I know this: God is real. He intervenes in our world, and He loves us enough to pursue us even when we're His enemies. If you're here today as a skeptic, and I know some of you are, I want to tell you, your skepticism is valid. Your questions are good. But don't let skepticism keep you from examining evidence that challenges your worldview. Be willing to follow truth wherever it leads, even if it leads somewhere you never expected. And if you're here as a believer who's struggling, who's wondering if faith is worth the cost, I want to tell you it is. Not because believing makes life easier, it doesn't, but because truth is worth any cost, and God is worth any sacrifice. After the service, a young woman approached me. "Hi, Nathan. I'm Emma. I've been coming to this church for a few months, trying to figure out if I believe any of this. I was raised atheist, like you. And your story, it's the first time Christianity has seemed like something I could actually believe. What made the difference? You didn't pretend it was easy. You didn't act like faith solves all problems. You were honest about the cost, and that honesty made everything else you said credible. So, how do I start? If I want to explore this?" I spent the next hour talking with Emma, recommending books, answering questions, offering to meet regularly to discuss her journey, and I realized this was it. This was what God had saved me for, not just to believe myself, but to help others find what I'd found, to be a bridge between skepticism and faith, to show that you don't have to abandon your mind to embrace God. Walking to my car that afternoon, I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you for the rescue, for the journey, for using all of it, even the painful parts, to bring people to you. Keep using me, however you want, wherever you lead, I'm yours." 1 year after the accident, my life looked nothing like I'd expected, but it looked exactly like what I'd been created for, and that made all the difference. 18 months after the accident, I received an invitation that felt both terrifying and inevitable, to speak at a major atheist conference. The invitation came from someone I'd debated years ago in college, a prominent atheist philosopher named Dr. Michael Stevens. He'd seen my story and wanted me to speak at their annual Reason conference in Seattle. "Nathan, I'll be direct," his email read. "When I heard you'd converted to Christianity, I thought you'd lost your mind. But I've been following your blog, reading your arguments. You're not the caricature of a Christian that we usually critique. You're engaging intellectually. And I think our conference attendees need to hear from someone like you, a former atheist who converted based on an experience he can't deny. Will you come? Present your case honestly? Let us examine it." I stared at that email for a long time. Going to an atheist conference to defend my conversion felt like walking into a firing squad. These were my former people, the ones who would understand exactly how to dismantle my arguments, who would show no mercy. But I also felt God nudging me. "This is why I saved you, not just for the Christians, for the skeptics too." I accepted. The conference was in April. 3 months to prepare, 3 months to figure out how to explain the most significant experience of my life to an audience determined to disprove it. I worked with Pastor Mike to prepare my presentation. We anticipated every objection, every counter-argument, every way they'd try to explain away my experience naturally. The key, Pastor Mike said, is to be honest. Don't overstate your case. Don't claim certainty where you have doubt. But also don't back down from what you know to be true. Jason from small group helped me rehearse, playing devil's advocate, throwing the hardest questions he could think of. How do you know it wasn't a hallucination? What makes your experience different from people who claim to be abducted by aliens? If God can intervene to save you, why doesn't he intervene to save dying children? I practiced answering until the responses felt natural, until I could address the hard questions without becoming defensive or uncertain. The night before the conference, I barely slept, kept imagining standing in front of hundreds of atheists, trying to defend an experience that defied their entire worldview. I prayed through the night. God, I'm going into this alone. These people will see me as a traitor, someone who abandoned reason for superstition. Give me the words, the courage, the clarity to share truth in a way they can hear. The conference venue was a large hotel in downtown Seattle. Registration tables outside, hundreds of people milling around wearing name tags. Books by Dawkins, Harris, and Dennett for sale. I felt like I'd stepped back in time. 2 years ago, I would have been one of them, excited to be around fellow skeptics, ready to mock religious belief. Now, I was the subject of mockery. I checked in, got my speaker badge, and sat in the back of the conference hall for the morning sessions, listening to presentations about cognitive biases in religious belief, the evolution of religion, why smart people believe dumb things. Each presentation was well argued, persuasive. I could see why I'd found this worldview compelling for so long. But I also saw the blind spots, the assumption that materialism was the only valid framework, the dismissal of experiences that didn't fit the naturalistic paradigm, the certainty that left no room for the possibility they might be wrong. My presentation was scheduled for after lunch. Religious conversion through supernatural experience, a former atheist's perspective. As I walked to the front of the room, I saw Dr. Stevens in the audience. He nodded encouragingly. Around him, hundreds of faces watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to outright hostility. I stood at the podium and began. My name is Nathan. 2 years ago, I was sitting where you're sitting now, an atheist, a skeptic, someone who saw religious belief as a failure of critical thinking. I would have dismissed my own story as delusion or fraud. Today, I'm going to tell you why I don't dismiss it. Not because I've abandoned reason, but because I've encountered evidence that challenges the naturalistic worldview I held. I told the story, the accident, the fire, the rescue, the details that couldn't be easily explained, the physical evidence, the transformation that followed. But I also addressed the objections head-on. I know what you're thinking. Stress-induced hallucination, oxygen deprivation, confabulated memory. I've researched all of those explanations. Here's why they don't fit. I presented the evidence methodically. The timeline, the physics, the testimonies, the physical impossibility of what would have had to happen for natural explanations to work. I'm not asking you to believe what I believe, but I am asking you to consider whether your naturalistic framework might be incomplete, whether there might be aspects of reality that can't be reduced to physical processes. Then I opened for questions. The first hand up was a neuroscientist. Mr. Harrison, everything you described is consistent with temporal lobe activity under extreme stress. Your brain was creating a narrative to help you cope with trauma. That's well documented. It is well documented, I agreed, but temporal lobe experiences have specific characteristics. They're typically dreamlike, fragmented, inconsistent with physical reality. What I experienced was concrete, detailed, and resulted in physical effects. I was moved 50 feet from a burning car in seconds. Temporal lobe activity doesn't do that. A philosopher stood up. You're committing the argument from ignorance fallacy. Just because you can't think of a natural explanation doesn't mean there isn't one. Maybe the explanation is unusual, but still natural. Fair point. But I'm not arguing from ignorance. I'm arguing from evidence. The evidence points to intervention by an intelligence with capabilities beyond natural human strength. Now you can call that an unknown natural force. But at some point, when you keep adding natural explanations that require increasingly unlikely circumstances, Occam's razor suggests you consider the simpler explanation: supernatural intervention. A woman in the back. What about all the people who pray and don't get rescued, who die in fires? If God saved you, why doesn't He save them? That's the hardest question in Christianity, and I don't have a complete answer. I don't know why God intervenes sometimes and not others, but the existence of unanswered prayers doesn't disprove answered ones. The fact that God doesn't always intervene doesn't mean He never does. The questions continued for an hour, some hostile, some genuinely curious, all challenging, but I didn't back down, didn't become defensive, just presented the evidence as clearly as I could and acknowledged the limits of what I could prove. When the session ended, the room was divided. Some people were shaking their heads, clearly unconvinced. Others looked thoughtful. A few approached me afterward. Dr. Stevens was first. "Nathan, that was compelling. I still don't believe what you believe. But you made a case that deserves serious consideration. You didn't resort to faith language or special pleading. You engaged on our terms. Because I used to speak this language. I know what convinces skeptics and what doesn't." A younger man approached next. "I'm a grad student in philosophy. I came here expecting to have my atheism reinforced. But your presentation, it's made me reconsider some assumptions. Can I ask you some follow-up questions? Maybe over coffee?" We exchanged contact information. Then others came, not all friendly. Some wanted to argue, some wanted to understand. A few wanted to share their own experiences that they'd been dismissing. One woman in her 50s pulled me aside. 20 years ago, I had an experience similar to yours, a moment where something impossible happened and I couldn't explain it. But I forced myself to dismiss it because it didn't fit my worldview. Listening to you, I wonder if I was wrong to do that. If maybe I encountered something real and talked myself out of it. What happened? My daughter was drowning. I dove in to save her, but the current was too strong. I was going under, and then someone pushed me toward the shore with incredible force. When I looked back, no one was there, but we made it to safety. What did you decide it was? An underwater current? A lucky wave? Anything but what it felt like, someone saving us. But Nathan, it didn't feel natural. It felt like intervention. Why did you dismiss it? Because I'd spent my whole life being an atheist. Accepting that it was supernatural would have meant rethinking everything, and I wasn't ready to do that. I'm still not sure I am. But hearing you speak with such honesty about the cost and the journey, it's making me reconsider. That conversation stayed with me. How many people had experiences they dismissed because acknowledging them would cost too much? That evening, Dr. Stevens invited me to dinner with several other conference speakers, all atheists, all brilliant, all skeptical of my claims, but the conversation was respectful, probing, honest. "Nathan, let me ask you something," one philosopher said. "Do you ever doubt? Do you ever wake up and think maybe everyone else is right and you experience something that felt real but wasn't?" All the time. Doubt is part of my faith journey now, but doubt isn't the same as disbelief. I can doubt and still believe, question and still trust, because the foundation of my faith isn't my certainty, it's what I experienced. And that doesn't change based on my feelings. But feelings are unreliable. That's epistemology 101. I'm not basing this on feelings. I'm basing it on an experience that had concrete, verifiable effects. I was pulled from a burning car. That happened. The question is what caused it. And after examining every natural explanation, I concluded the supernatural one fits best. Another philosopher jumped in, but supernatural explanations can explain anything. That's why we exclude them from scientific inquiry. They're unfalsifiable. Some supernatural claims are unfalsifiable, but specific supernatural claims can be examined. Did a person with unusual strength pull me from a car? That's testable. We can look at the physics, the timeline, the evidence, and we can conclude whether natural explanations are sufficient. In my case, I don't think they are. The conversation went on for hours. By the end, no one had converted, but there was mutual respect. An acknowledgement that I was engaging seriously with the questions, not retreating to faith, claims that couldn't be examined. Flying home the next day, I reflected on the experience. I hadn't converted anyone, hadn't even come close, but I'd shown them that Christians could think, could engage intellectually, could present cases that deserved consideration rather than dismissal. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the bridge building God wanted from me. Back in Denver, I shared about the conference at small group. How did it feel? Jason asked, going back into that world as a Christian? Uncomfortable, challenging, but also right. Like I was doing what God saved me for, being a witness in a place that desperately needs it. Are you going to keep doing this, speaking at secular venues? I think so, if they'll have me. Because there are people in those spaces who need to hear that faith is intellectually viable. That conversion doesn't mean abandoning your brain. Maria spoke up. Nathan, you're doing something crucial. You're showing both sides, Christians and atheists, that we can engage respectfully, that we don't have to demonize each other. Over the following months, I received several more invitations, a philosophy department panel discussion, a podcast debate with an atheist neuroscientist, an interview for a documentary about religious conversion. Each time I felt the same mix of fear and calling, fear that I'd failed to represent Christ well, calling because I knew this was my purpose. Around this time, my blog readership grew significantly. The conference video had been posted online and gone viral in both atheist and Christian circles. Comments came from both sides, from atheists, still don't believe, but respect the honesty. You're making it harder to dismiss Christianity as obviously false. I don't agree with your conclusions, but your arguments deserve serious engagement. From Christians, thank you for showing that faith doesn't require checking your brain at the door. You're helping me articulate why I believe to my skeptical friends. Your honesty about doubt makes faith seem more real, not less. But the most impactful message came from someone unexpected, Sarah. Nathan, I've been watching your journey for 18 months now, and I need to tell you something. I'm exploring Christianity. Not because of you, I need it to be my own journey, but because you showed me it was possible to be intellectually honest and still believe. I'm reading the Bible, going to church, asking questions. I don't know where this will lead, but thank you for being willing to lose everything to follow truth. It gave me permission to seek truth too. I read that message 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Sarah might find God. Not to get back together, we'd both moved on, but to find what I'd found, to encounter truth that changed everything. And that, more than any successful debate or viral video, felt like vindication. That Sunday at church, I shared about Sarah's message during testimony time. 18 months ago, I lost the woman I loved because I chose faith over comfort. That loss nearly destroyed me. But today, I found out she's seeking God because of the example I set, and I realized God redeems everything. Every sacrifice, every loss, every hard choice, He uses it all for His purposes. The church erupted in applause and tears. After the service, Pastor Mike pulled me aside. Nathan, I think it's time we talk about your calling more formally. Have you considered going into ministry full-time? I'm not qualified. I've only been a Christian for 18 months. You're more qualified than you think. You have a unique voice, a unique perspective, a unique ability to reach skeptics that most pastors can't reach. Would you pray about it? About whether God might be calling you to something more than engineering? I promised I would pray about it, but honestly, I already knew the answer. God had saved me from a burning car, transformed me from his enemy to his follower, given me a story that resonated with both believers and skeptics. And now he was calling me to use that story full time, to be a bridge, a voice, a witness to his reality in a world that desperately needed to hear it. 18 months after the accident, my life had become something I never could have imagined. But it had also become exactly what I was created for, and that made every sacrifice worth it. 2 years after the accident, I stood in the same church where I'd been baptized, but this time I wasn't in the congregation. I was being commissioned as a full-time minister. The decision to leave engineering hadn't been easy. It meant financial uncertainty. It meant fully committing to a path that seemed impossible 2 years ago. But after months of prayer and counsel, I knew it was right. Pastor Mike stood with me at the front, along with several other church leaders. Nathan Harrison came to us 2 years ago as a broken, confused former atheist who'd encountered God in the most dramatic way possible. Today, we commission him as a minister of the gospel. Not because he has all the answers, but because he has a testimony that points to truth. Not because he's perfect, but because he's willing to be used. The congregation prayed over me, hands on my shoulders, voices lifting my name to God, and I felt the weight of this calling settle on me, not as a burden but as a purpose. After the service, dozens of people approached me, some with tears, some with stories of their own doubts and questions, some just wanting to express support. But one person surprised me more than anyone, my father. "Nathan, can we talk?" We stepped outside into the Colorado sunshine. "Your mother and I have been watching you for 2 years now, watching how you've handled this journey, the losses, the challenges, the way you've built a new life around beliefs we don't share. Dad, I know you still don't believe." Let me finish. "You're right, we don't believe what you believe. But Nathan, we've also never seen you more alive, more purposeful, more authentically yourself. And I have to admit, maybe there's something to this faith of yours that I don't understand. Are you saying you're reconsidering?" "I'm saying I'm less certain than I used to be. Your mother and I have started reading the Bible, not because we believe it, but because we want to understand what's transformed our son so completely. And we're finding things we didn't expect, questions we can't easily answer." Tears filled my eyes. "Dad, we're not there yet. Maybe we never will be. But Nathan, you've made it impossible for us to dismiss Christianity as obviously false, because you're not delusional, you're not weak-minded, you're you, and you believe. That means something." I hugged my father for a long time, not because he'd converted, he hadn't, but because he was open, and openness was everything. That evening I sat in my apartment, a different one now, smaller, more affordable for a minister's salary, and I wrote in my journal, something I'd been doing consistently since the accident. 2 years ago tonight I crashed on a dark highway. My car burst into flames. I should have died, but someone pulled me out, and everything changed. I lost Sarah, my career trajectory, my reputation as a rational skeptic, friendships, comfort, certainty. But I gained something I didn't know I was missing. I found truth. I found God. I found a purpose bigger than myself. I found a community of believers who welcomed me despite my past. I found a calling that uses everything about my story, including the painful parts, to point others to Christ. Looking back, I wouldn't change anything, not the accident, not the cost, not the struggle, because all of it was necessary to get me here, to this place of purpose and peace and profound gratitude. God saved my life in that fire, but he's been saving me ever since, saving me from my own pride, my certainty, my narrow understanding of reality. He's been transforming me from who I was into who he created me to be. And that transformation continues, will continue for the rest of my life, because following Jesus isn't a destination, it's a journey, and I'm just getting started. And then, the next week, I began my first official role as a minister, leading a new outreach specifically designed for skeptics and seekers, a space where people could ask hard questions without judgment, where doubt was welcomed alongside faith. where honest inquiry was valued over easy answers. We called it the Skeptics Forum. It met every Thursday evening at the church. The first night, 12 people showed up. Some were Christians who struggled with doubt. Some were atheists or agnostics genuinely exploring. Some were just curious about this former atheist pastor. "Welcome," I began. "This is a safe space to ask any question, no matter how challenging, to express any doubt, no matter how deep. My story is proof that God isn't afraid of our questions. He meets us in them. So let's start. What questions do you have about faith?" The questions came immediately. If God is good, why is there so much suffering? How can you believe in miracles when they violate natural laws? What about people who never hear about Jesus? Are they condemned? How do you know Christianity is true and not all the other religions? I answered each question honestly, not with pat answers or proof texts, but with thoughtful responses that acknowledged the complexity. Sometimes I said, "I don't know, but here's how I think about it." Sometimes I shared my own struggles with the same questions. And something remarkable happened. People engaged, not defensively, not dismissively, but genuinely. They shared their own doubts, their own experiences, their own wrestling with truth. By the end of the evening, several people stayed late, continuing conversations in small groups. One young woman approached me as I was packing up. "I'm Emma. I came to your talk about a year ago when you shared your story at church. And Nathan, I need to tell you, I'm ready to follow Jesus. Your honesty about doubt and cost gave me permission to explore faith seriously, and I found it to be true." That night, I had the privilege of praying with Emma as she committed her life to Christ, and I felt the full weight of why God had saved me, not just for myself, but for people like Emma, who needed to see that faith was intellectually viable. Over the following months, the Skeptics Forum grew, 20 people, then 40. Then we needed a bigger room. People were coming from across Denver, skeptics, seekers, doubters, questioners. And some were finding faith, not all, maybe not even most, but enough to confirm that this was my calling. Around this time, I was invited to speak at universities, philosophy departments, religious studies classes, debate forums. Each time, I told my story, presented the evidence, engaged with objections, and maintained that faith didn't require abandoning reason. It required following evidence to its logical conclusion, even when that conclusion was uncomfortable. Not everyone was convinced, but many were impacted. A philosophy professor at Colorado State pulled me aside after one talk. "I'm still an atheist, but you've made me reconsider how dismissive I've been of religious claims. You've shown me that there are serious thinkers on the other side. Thank you for that." A student from University of Denver emailed me weeks later. "Your talk challenged everything I thought I knew. I've been exploring Christianity since hearing you speak. I'm not there yet, but I'm genuinely considering it for the first time in my life." My blog, which had started as a personal journal, had grown into a resource that thousands of people read regularly. Comments came from around the world. From Australia, "I'm a skeptic exploring faith. Your honesty helps." From the UK, "I'm a Christian who struggles with doubt. You've shown me doubt and faith can coexist." From India, "As someone from a Hindu background exploring Christianity, your story shows that truth can be found through genuine seeking." The blog led to a book deal. A publisher wanted me to write the full story, not just the accident, but the 2-year journey from militant atheist to minister. The doubts, the costs, the transformation. Writing that book was one of the hardest things I'd done. It required reliving every painful moment, every loss, every doubt, every struggle. But it also required acknowledging every grace, every provision, every moment where God showed up when I needed him most. I titled it, "Pulled from Fire: How God Saved a Skeptic Who Didn't Believe in Him." The book released on the 2-year anniversary of the accident, and it became something I never expected, a bestseller. Not because I was a great writer, not because I had all the answers, but because people resonated with honesty, with a story that didn't pretend faith was easy or cost-free, with a journey that validated both doubt and belief. Reviews came from both sides. From Christianity Today, Harrison offers a compelling case for faith that doesn't require intellectual suicide, a must-read for skeptics and believers alike. As from Skeptic magazine, while we don't share Harrison's conclusions, his intellectual honesty is refreshing. He engages seriously with objections rather than dismissing them. But the most meaningful response came from readers who wrote to tell me how the book had affected them. I was about to give up on Christianity because I thought my doubts meant I didn't really believe. Your book showed me that doubt is part of the journey. I've been an atheist my whole life. Your book is the first Christian argument I couldn't easily dismiss. My son came out as an atheist last year, and it broke my heart. Reading your story gave me hope that God can reach anyone. One message particularly moved me. It was from a woman named Jennifer. Nathan, 10 years ago I had an experience similar to yours. I was in a car accident, and someone pulled me out right before the car caught fire. But I forced myself to dismiss it as coincidence or misremembered details because I was an atheist and couldn't accept a supernatural explanation. Your book made me reconsider. I'm now exploring Christianity for the first time. Thank you for giving me permission to trust my own experience. Reading messages like that, I understood the full scope of what God had done. He hadn't just saved me in that burning car. He'd given me a story that could help save others, not physically, but spiritually. 2.5 years after the accident, I received an unexpected call. "Nathan, this is Sarah." My heart jumped. We'd exchanged occasional messages over the past year, but hadn't talked on the phone. "Sarah, hi, how are you?" "I'm good. Really good, actually. Nathan, I need to tell you something. I got baptized last Sunday." I sat down, overwhelmed. "Sarah, that's—" "I know. Me, the hardcore atheist. The one who left you because you converted. Nathan, I've spent the past 1.5 years genuinely exploring Christianity, reading, questioning, praying even, and I've come to believe it's true." "What convinced you?" "Honestly, you did. Not by arguing with me, not by trying to convert me, but by living so consistently with what you claimed to believe, even when it cost you everything. That authenticity made me take Christianity seriously for the first time, and once I did, I kept finding evidence I'd been ignoring. Philosophical arguments I couldn't refute, historical evidence I couldn't dismiss, and eventually my own experience of God that I couldn't deny. I'm so happy for you. Nathan, I know we can't go back. We've both moved on. But I wanted you to know, losing you was the catalyst for finding God, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Sarah had found God. The woman I'd lost because of my faith had found faith herself. It felt like the final piece of redemption, proof that nothing I'd sacrificed had been wasted, that God really did work all things, even painful losses, for good. That Sunday, I shared Sarah's conversion at church during testimony time. The congregation celebrated like she was one of them, because in a way she was, a victory of God's grace that had come through faithfulness in the face of loss. 3 years after the accident, I returned to the highway one more time, but this time I wasn't alone. I'd organized a small gathering, a 3-year anniversary remembrance. Pastor Mike came, Jason from small group, several people who'd found faith through my ministry, Emma, who I'd led to Christ, and others whose lives had been impacted by my story. We stood at the place where the car had burned, the place where I'd been pulled from death, the place where everything changed. 3 years ago, I began. I crashed here. My car caught fire. I was trapped, and someone saved me. I don't know if it was an angel, a manifestation of God himself, a miracle I'll never fully understand, but I know it was real, and I know it changed everything. Today I wanted to come back here with people who represent what God's done with that rescue. Emma, who found faith through hearing my story. Jason, who mentored me when I was a baby Christian. Pastor Mike, who believed in me when I was still figuring things out, and others whose lives have been touched by what happened here. This isn't just about me. This is about what God can do when we let Him use our stories, when we're willing to follow truth despite the cost, when we trust that He can redeem even our deepest pain. We prayed together, thanked God for His faithfulness, for rescue, both physical and spiritual, for the ways He'd used one dramatic moment to create ripples that were still spreading. As we were leaving, Emma pulled me aside. "Nathan, I need to tell you something. I've felt God calling me to ministry, specifically to work with skeptics and seekers. You've modeled what that looks like, and I want to do the same thing, be a bridge between doubt and faith." "Emma, that's incredible. It's because of you. You showed me that ministry doesn't have to look traditional, that some of us are called to reach the people who would never walk into a church. Thank you for that example." Driving home that day, I reflected on 3 years of transformation, from arrogant atheist to humble believer, from someone certain about everything to someone comfortable with mystery, from a person who mocked faith to someone who lived by it, from an engineer focused on his career to a minister focused on reaching souls. Every part of my life had been transformed, and all of it traced back to that moment in a burning car when I'd cried out to a God I didn't believe in, and He'd answered. That evening, I opened my journal one more time. 3 years ago, I died, or should have, but God had other plans. He pulled me from a burning car. Then He spent 3 years pulling me from everything else that was burning. My pride, my certainty, my self-sufficiency, my need to have all the answers. The cost was high. I lost relationships, reputation, career trajectory, comfort. So much of what I thought defined me. But I gained infinitely more. I gained truth, purpose, community, a relationship with the God of the universe, and a calling that uses every part of my story, including the painful parts, to point others to Him. I'm not the same person who crashed on that highway. I'm not the atheist who mocked Christians. I'm not the arrogant know-it-all who thought he had reality figured out. I'm someone who met God, who was confronted with evidence so undeniable that I couldn't dismiss it, who chose to follow truth even when it cost everything. And I've discovered something profound. When you lose everything for the sake of truth, you gain everything that actually matters. I found God, or rather, He found me, in a burning car, in the darkest moment of my life, when I had nowhere else to turn. And He's been finding me ever since, in every doubt, every question, every challenge, every opportunity to share what He's done. This is my story, the ex-atheist testimony of someone who laughed at Christians until a light pulled him from a burning car, until the impossible became undeniable, until skepticism gave way to faith. I don't have all the answers. I still struggle with doubt. I still ask hard questions. But I know this: God is real. He intervenes, He saves, He transforms, He redeems. He uses broken, skeptical, doubting people like me to accomplish His purposes. And 3 years after that burning car, I can say with certainty, every sacrifice was worth it. Every loss led to greater gain. Every doubt led to deeper faith. Because I've encountered truth, and truth is worth any cost. God saved my life 3 years ago, but He's been saving me ever since, and He's not done yet. This is just the beginning. 5 years later, Nathan Harrison's ministry had reached thousands. His book was translated into multiple languages. His Skeptics Forum model was adopted by churches around the world. His story continued to challenge atheists and encourage believers. But the impact that mattered most wasn't measured in numbers or reach. It was measured in individual lives transformed. People like Emma, now leading her own outreach to skeptics. Like Sarah, who'd reconciled with faith after years away. Like the countless others who'd written to say, "Your story gave me permission to explore what I'd been dismissing." Nathan never forgot the burning car, the impossible rescue, the moment everything changed. Because that moment wasn't just about physical salvation. It was about pointing to a greater rescue available to everyone. God saving a skeptic who didn't believe in Him. God pulling someone from fire, physical and spiritual. God proving that no one is too far gone, too skeptical, too hostile, too certain in their disbelief. God reaches even those who laugh at him. And when they cry out in desperation, even if they don't believe he's there, he answers. He saves, he transforms, always.